the Sith will rule the galaxy. And we shall have
lamb chops.
Well, this guy's crazy.
You take one look at the animal and you wonder how anyone could love a face like that.
Give me a drink. Real simple. Give me a drink. Give me a drink.
Let's watch a video. This is a classic. Let's watch.
Thank you, David. You're generous as always with your introduction. You were a little bit harsh there on Stephen, I think. But I know where you're coming from. Anyway, hello there and welcome to the Attic. I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the fourth in a series of videos in which I'm reviewing the material shown to Jehovah's Witnesses at their 2022 Pursue Peace Convention, which, as with the previous two conventions, is taking place virtually in response to the COVID pandemic. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the Saturday afternoon session of the convention, and as always, there's a lot for us to get through. So without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
What is inappropriate boasting? Basically, it's self-praise, and the Bible condemns self-praise. Notice Proverbs chapter 27 and verse 2. Let someone else praise you, and not your own mouth, others, and not your own lips. Self-praise is an evidence of pride, and that causes one to elevate himself above others. Some might develop an unhealthy pride about their accomplishments, even in the ministry. How does inappropriate boasting wreck peace? Well, it's not wrong to take pleasure in our work and to thank Jehovah for the success that we may have. But inappropriate boasting about our accomplishments can stir up competition, envy, and rivalry. We must remember that self-promotion does not originate with our Heavenly Father, the God of peace. Where does it originate? 1 John 2:16 says, "The showy display of one's means of life does not originate with the Father, but originates with the world." And wouldn't you not agree that the world is filled with self-praise? Even on their social media, we see this. Some of the material that people post on the social media is designed to make the one appear very important. And it is a showy display of their accomplishments, material possessions, or their expensive vacations that they enjoyed. In other words, it's all about, look at me. Well, we want to avoid getting caught up in the world spirit of self-promotion that wrecks peace. So because of the devastating effects that improper boasting can have on ourselves and others, we do not even want to give the impression of boasting. Now, another way that we can put away improper boasting is to not talk about ourselves, but to acknowledge the good and the fine qualities that our fellow workers have. Humble and modest people don't brag about what they do, but they turn their attention to their fellow workers and see how Jehovah is using them and blessing them in His service. And when we do that, that creates a very peaceful, happy environment.
We're watching governing body helper Harold Corkin deliver the first part of a symposium. His theme is Put Away Peace Wreckers, Inappropriate Boasting. And I guess immediately before Harold says anything, I have a problem with the theme. What is the need for the word inappropriate? Either it's boasting or it isn't. Boasting is obviously excessive self-praise. It's talking about yourself in an excessive way and boasting about your accomplishments. So how come there can be appropriate boasting or proper boasting? I think the organization is acknowledging that Jehovah, the God Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to worship, routinely boasts in the Bible about how great he is and wants people to praise him for how great he is. So that's, I think, what they would term proper or appropriate boasting. But you could argue that, to a degree, the organization's leaders boast about themselves an awful lot. And I think they would class that as appropriate or proper boasting. And I actually have some examples that I will be showing you shortly of where actual governing body members on camera have been doing this. But first, let's just revisit what Harold said here.
Some of the material that people post on the social media is designed to make the one appear very important. And it is a showy display of their accomplishments, material possessions, or their expensive vacations that they enjoyed. In other words, it's all about, look at me.
This just strikes me as shaming more or less everyone who uses social media, who doesn't use social media to in some way lavish praise on Jehovah's organization or the governing body. I mean, what do you use social media for? You use it to share things about yourself. And of course, you're not going to go on social media and continually complain about how disappointed you are in yourself, although I'm sure there are people that do that. Of course, you're going to share the positives. And of course, the image that you project on social media isn't going to convey reality. So it's not going to, for example, show you sitting on the toilet or throwing up or falling over or arguing with someone. Of course, it's going to convey a kind of clean, sanitized version of yourself, a version that you are happy with the whole world seeing. If that's an improper use of social media, then quite frankly, what is the point of social media? And why is it that only 8 dudes in the entire world get to talk about their accomplishments? Example 1, and you're going to find this video incredibly familiar, especially if you've been following these convention rebuttals. And the reason for that is that this footage was taken not just from the same convention, but from a couple of hours earlier on the same day of the convention.
An 18-year-old brother was trying to decide what he wanted to do after high school. He was raised in the truth, and in his heart, he wanted to be a pioneer. But he also had a scholarship to go to university and some other grants, and he had been accepted to attend. Do you remember that 18-year-old young brother who was trying to decide which path to take? Well, that was me some years ago. I'm so glad that with the help of Jehovah and my parents and other mature friends in the congregation, I made the decision, just like so many other brothers and sisters around the world, to turn down that scholarship, to give up university, and go directly into the full-time service.
As I've commented already in Sushi 382, thumbnail here, if Tibor is gracious, this was just brazen boasting. Mark Sanderson using his accomplishments, or accomplishments that I suppose he very nearly had, using the fact that he got awarded a scholarship and had a university acceptance letter to persuade young people to reject higher education. He could have done that any number of ways without giving this impression that he's some kind of intellectual titan, some hidden gem of the scholarly world whose wisdom Jehovah's Witnesses have been blessed with now that he's become a member of the governing body. He could have simply said, I turned down higher education. Instead, he needed to tell us all about the scholarship, the grants, and the acceptance letter. And by the way, someone commented, I think either on the Sushi or on the full rebuttal, that's not something you get a scholarship and an acceptance letter just by accident. You don't do minimal effort and wake up one morning and, oh, look, a scholarship letter's come through the door. And, oh, look, without me even asking, an acceptance letter has come through from this university. Mark Sanderson was going out looking for that opportunity. And when it finally came, he then turned it down. But if we're supposed to be so impressed with him turning down higher education eventually, what conclusions should we reach about the phase he was going through where he was pursuing higher education to the point of getting a scholarship? Anyway, however you look at it, in my opinion, this was excessive self-praise, and it's again on the very same day that we have a convention item with the theme, Put Away Peace Wreckers, Inappropriate Boasting. But I'm not done with showing you examples of governing body members boasting. Here's another one.
I am so thankful to Jehovah that positive peer pressure was put on me to enter the pioneer ministry right out of high school. What a blessing and a protection it was to enter the regular pioneer work at age 17 and to be able to go to Bethel at 18. Even though there was considerable worldly pressure put on me to pursue university education, I am so happy that with Jehovah's help, I decided to build my future with Jehovah. Truly, I have no regrets.
I do miss the good old days when Stephen was a bit further away from the camera, if I'm honest. But yes, it's the same thing. It's maybe a less brazen example as what Mark Sanderson was giving us. But nonetheless, it's the same narrative of, look at me, look how wonderful I am, because I was entering pioneer service at only 17, straight out of high school. I turned down worldly pressure to pursue higher education. Quite frankly, Stephen, I think higher education would have done you the world of good with some of the nonsense you've been coming out with. And he's bragging about his organizational accomplishments, his personal accomplishments that he wants an entire generation of young Jehovah's Witnesses to replicate so that they can praise him, as was also the case with Mark Sanderson. But perhaps my personal favourite example of a governing body member bragging in public is this one.
And I have to tell you this here because we know so many of you. You know my dad's a wealthy man, and my mother, and they're not Jehovah's Witnesses. He's 92, and she's high 70s. And he's always wondering, well, where's all that money going, you know? And did somebody stealing? And you're just stupid, Tony, you know? And they're taking advantage of you. So not long ago, he says to me, you know, what are they doing with the money? The they? And I told him, I said, look, I'm part of the they. It's not happening. And he went, oh. That's part of the day. I tell you. So.
I'll never tire of hearing that clip. That was a blast from the past. In case you're wondering, this was a clip from one of my very earliest videos that was first published to what was then the John Cedars channel, later retitled as Lloyd Evans. I took it off the channel because at the time Watchtower was going crazy with copyright claims. I started up a separate channel called JW Survey, and that's where you can still today find a whole bunch of videos with the title Getting to Know and then the name of a governing body member, because this was pre-JW broadcasting. in the world before JW Broadcasting, people didn't really know what the governing body members sounded like. But there were MP3 talk recordings that you could actually download. And when I started listening to them as someone who'd only recently woken up, I thought, people have got to hear what these crackpots sound like, which is why I created the series. And of course, shortly it would become redundant because we'd all see in glorious HD how mad and how profoundly unworthy of adulation these men are. But back then, this was the only way I could think of helping people see the man behind the curtain. And in this particular clip, you have Tony Morris not just boasting that his father, who I think is actually his stepfather, his father is a wealthy man, but also boasting about his wit and his intelligence in how he's interacting with his father, and boasting about being one of the they, in other words, one of the leaders of the organization who is receiving the money and who is therefore in a position to say, it's not happening, or there isn't any financial foul play afoot, which, okay, we'll take your word for it, Tony, but nonetheless, especially the way he's clearly so impressed with this anecdote and how funny he thinks it is. And of course, he's going to get laughter with anything that he says on the platform because he's in front of a doting audience who hang on his every word. But this, for me, was yet another obvious example of bragging. And bear in mind, when I first heard it, it was, I'm going to say, over 10 years ago, when I was still quite new in my waking up process. And if you're watching it for the first time now, you're probably feeling the same way as I felt listening to it for the first time when I was making this video over 10 years ago. How is this a humble man? How is this someone who dignifies others rather than dignifying himself, rather than bragging about himself? The entire premise of this talk on inappropriate boasting is hypocritical, not just because the God that Jehovah's Witnesses worship boasts continually in the Bible, but because time after time his so-called faithful slave have followed his example.
In the following dramatization, notice how a sister's action are misunderstood as boasting.
Put away from yourselves every kind of malicious bitterness, anger, wrath, screaming and abusive speech, as well as everything injurious. Did anyone start the day thinking, I believe I'll show malicious bitterness to my brother today? Of course not. And yet the potential is there, isn't it? But genuine affection fights peace wreckers. And affection grows when we really know our brothers and sisters well. We remember their joys and pain, their selfless zeal, how they came to love Jehovah, and what they endure.
So we've just seen the beginning of a dramatization that spans the Saturday afternoon of the 2022 Pursue Peace Convention. And I've chosen this point right after the opening minute or so to just reflect on the fact that one of the cast members is someone I know and someone I still consider to be a friend, although I'm sure he doesn't feel the same way. But before I say any more, and I do have quite a bit to say on this, if Tibor is gracious, perhaps you will see overlaid the speaker at the Kingdom Hall in the dramatization. This is actually Stephen Papps, and he is a member of the Britain Branch Committee. And I know who this is because Stephen Papps came to my MTS graduation in 2005. I got to chat with him briefly then. And I remember of the visiting delegation from Bethel, there was him and there was, I forget the other guy's name, quite an older guy. But he was the one I was most drawn to as someone who seemed quite kind and quite intelligent. And frankly, the sort of person I hoped would be at the top of the ladder, at the top of the hierarchy. You know, this was before I got to know the governing body and who's on the governing body and what sort of men they are. But Stephen Papps I actually found quite impressive. But it's not Stephen Papps I want to talk about. It's my buddy who was on the MTS course with me. This was the 29th class in Britain. I'm not going to share his full name, but I will share his first name. I just want to limit as much as possible how much personal information I share. I'm not interested in unnecessarily upsetting my classmate. But my friend is called Robin. And he and I, well, I wouldn't say we were the closest of pals during the MTS class. But we did have one or two moments together. And I would say out of all of the people that I shared time with during the course, probably my moments with him were the most memorable, if that makes sense. And as some of you may know, I actually filmed large chunks of my experience at MTS for a video that came to be called MTS 29, which was actually my first ever video that I ever produced. I made it with a friend who was also a classmate, a different classmate. The trouble with the video, it has many problems. It's incredibly long, over 2 hours. It's incredibly self-indulgent. I basically made it because my mother, when we were having our final few conversations, she said, I want you to go to MTS, Lloyd, and I want you to film your graduation. And that kind of stayed with me. So I did everything I could to go to MTS, but I also knew that the rules didn't allow for filming the graduation. So I figured, well, if I take along a video camera and just film as much of the class as I can without actually filming the lessons and without actually filming the graduation itself, that will be something that I can show to Mum when she's resurrected. This was my thinking at the time as someone who believed all the teachings. I had this idea in my head that I would be able to show this video to my mum in the future. So that's what fueled my passion in putting together this 2-hour epic of a video. It was hopelessly self-indulgent, though. It needed to have huge amounts of material scrapped because most of it just isn't interesting. And the second problem with MTS 29 is the soundtrack. I used a lot of third-party music, and this was before I knew about what the appropriate levels were, and the music's really loud and in places quite deafening during MTS 29. So that's another reason why it's problematic to show it to people. And more than anything, I kind of still feel some solidarity with the guys who were on my class, weirdly. You know, even just making this mention of Robin feels a little bit weird, but I'm doing it because he is part of this convention propaganda, this dramatization. And I actually think it's a really, really good opportunity to show my audience how human, how relatable ordinary Jehovah's Witnesses are. That's basically why I'm doing this, Robin, in case you're watching. I think I'm doing it for good reasons. I'm not doing it just because I can or just because I'm interested in, exposing Robin. He's actually a really, really nice guy, so there's nothing to expose. But again, I think it's important to share this material, and hopefully you'll understand why once you've seen the 6-minute montage that I've put together. So I've taken this 2-hour epic and I've narrowed it down to 6 minutes of moments where Robin and I were enjoying, I guess, our experience at MTS. I actually allude to the MTS 29 film in one of the earliest videos on this channel. If Tibor is gracious, a thumbnail will appear to a video titled My MTS Memories, which does feature some footage, just footage of me, frankly, on my bed, talking about how stressed I am by the course. I'm certainly not featuring any of my classmates. You will hear little bits of third-party music, which an AI machine has managed to mostly get rid of, but there are still traces in there, odd lyrics here and there, which I actually think gives the montage quite a haunting quality. And there's also a scene where you see me reading from a cereal box in a very charismatic way. And that's because we were at this party and we were given this challenge of reading from a cereal box as though we were giving a talk. So that's what that's all about. Bear in mind that bits of songs will appear inexplicably at various points during this montage. And also bear in mind that there's a weird cereal box clip coming up. But otherwise, enjoy. Hello, Robin, how are you?
Hey, Lloyd.
Lloyd, that's me.
Since I'm done.
Yes, there is a Lloyd on that. It's quite appropriate, really, because I'm done. Thanks for bringing that to people's attention. Oh, here he comes. He looks splendid. This is Hugh Grant, otherwise known as Robin. He's a splendid item, of course. And this is where we're going to be having our photo taken.
When there are clouds,
it's very exciting.
In the sky.
Up to now, most of the pictures I've taken of Robin have been on his own. So,
as is this one.
Smile through your
yeah. Ronnie and Huey both gave fantastic items today, didn't you?
Yes.
Where you are an elder, aren't you, Ronnie? So they were elders in recommending someone to be a ministerial servant. And yours was to be an elder.
That we did not recommend.
No. You sacked him.
We disagree for the...
No one got through, did they, actually, in the demonstrations? I think you were a bit hard taskmasters, to be honest, but it was all done properly and by the book. Got a lot of pens there, Hugh. Do you don't mind me saying?
Yeah, can I talk you through them?
Yeah, sure.
This one is my absolute favourite. It's a Uniball Signo DX 0.38.
Moving on. How are you, Peter?
I'm fine, thank you.
Catching up on some, printing off some material there, I noticed.
Yes, I'm printing up material for tomorrow's lessons.
Well done. Being a diligent student, aren't you?
Well, I try not to be.
Oh, right. You don't...
This one in the class has to be.
This one is a very fun
We're not talking about the pens, okay? It's just not going to happen.
Come.
We want it to be an interesting film. It's just not fair on anyone.
But this one is so fine. I can write in my Bible.
Oh,
Important
I might actually have to borrow that, actually.
Like,
In all seriousness.
what's your name?
Taking down the sister's phone numbers.
Lloyd, there's your name.
Yeah, it's quite fine actually. And where did you get that from?
My brother in West Germany.
So you can't get them in this country.
Maybe. I don't know.
And what's he doing in West Germany? Cholesterol and additives. Can we really remain low in fat? No artificial colours, no preservatives, and no added salt. Flower attraction to this zoo is the oh, look at that face. Oh, get that look off your face. Every time I look at you, you're like, smile. What? What was that, Huey? Fantastic. And how do you feel about the porcupines?
I feel...
How did he make you feel?
Well, come and have a look.
Okay.
The thing is, I don't know which end's which.
I can't really see. Oh, right, yeah. They are porcupine, aren't they? They don't seem to be performing, do they? Big heap of pines, isn't it?
Could well be dead.
Who killed the porcupine?
Most of the animals here seem to be the dead or mad. I quite liked the giraffes.
Yeah?
Yeah, they were quite impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, impressing you quite a tall order.
Well, you know, I like to think that I'm easily
not funny?
pleased.
Never mind.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah. See what I did there?
I can see exactly what you did.
Yeah.
Now Robin's explained it to me.
Yeah. It tickled Robin.
It did.
Yeah.
So what's your favourite animal so far, Lloyd?
I did like the giraffes actually. I think they're the most unusual.
Yeah, it's nice to see the baby. Did you capture the bear reversing?
The reversing bear was original. But
You mean it was original?
well, you don't see a bear reverse every day,
No,
do
but
you?
did you get it on there?
Yeah. It's all right.
Because then you could have lots of fun, couldn't you? Going forward and backward. And then like that.
You could anyway.
Yeah, I know. Even more, doubling it up. Like getting way out of the box with that one.
Anyway. I have to say, I was actually quite choked up putting that together because that was a special experience, I guess. Even though it was all nonsense, I still look back at my time at MTS and the memories I shared with Robin with a degree of fondness. I guess there's an element of brothers in arms about the whole thing, you know? We went through something together and we prevailed. And yeah, Robin was just this really warm, sweet guy. I used to tease him about him being the teacher's pet. I think we sort of had a mutual respect for each other. And I actually asked all of the students when I was leaving, when the class was over, I asked all the students to sign my students' notes. And I thought I'd show you what Robin wrote. So if Tibor is gracious, here is Robin's handwritten message. Loud Evans, that was my nickname. There is a lot more to you than your loud, larger-than-life personality reflects. You have a very annoying habit of calling me Hugh Grant, for example. He does look like Hugh Grant. But seriously, I've got to know a very sensitive and caring guy. You usually know where to draw the lines with your antics, though I still can't believe you got away with that Father Ted anthem through the PA. That just shows who the real teacher's pet has been all along. I'll explain that later. Thanks for all your fine answers and assignments, injecting good portions of humour into our lessons, and for sorting me out on that bleak Monday on the 3rd week. I'll explain that as well. I predict big things for you, Evans. Don't let me down, you hear. Also, don't forget that magical through ball that split the Punjabi defence, which led to your glory. Remember me when you get into your kingdom. Love, Robin. So even just reading that, I'm choking up a little bit, because what a sweet guy. And yeah, there were a few incidents during the course that he's referring to. He talks about the bleak Monday on the 3rd week. Basically, the first week is a little bit, when you're doing the MTS course, that is, you're kind of just getting used to it, and nothing is too shocking. But then you go into the 2nd week and the 3rd week, and bear in mind it's an 8-week course, and you're being given 3 hours of homework at the end of every day. So basically you wake up at like 7 o'clock or whatever and get yourself into the class, and you leave in the evening, come home, have your dinner, do 3 hours of homework, go to sleep, wake up, have a shower, go into the class, and it's just this constant treadmill. And all the time you're having to absorb all of this information. And at a certain point it got too much for Robin. And even though it was weird, actually, because he at the time was an elder, I assume he still is an elder, and I was just a ministerial servant, so he outranked me, you could say. But I found myself in the weird situation of giving him a pep talk as a ministerial servant, and telling him to pull through and trying to encourage him. So that's what he's referring to there. There's also the ball that split the Punjabi defence. What he's referring to is the local Punjabi congregation. Bear in mind, in these days, they used to have foreign language congregations, and this was a congregation for Punjabi speakers, and they challenged us to a game of football. And so we had like a full 11 of MTS classmates playing in this game against the Punjabi congregation, and we absolutely walloped them. And yours truly scored the first goal, and I'll never forget, it was this magical cross that Robin, from the right wing, very Beckham-esque, he just whipped in this cross, and I just managed to catch the ball on the volley, and it just sailed into the top right-hand corner, and it was our first goal. So it was just this kind of moment in time where it was so, but well, for me, it was, I was very proud of my goal, but also his reaction. And I remember looking back and one or two classmates literally jumping in the air like that. So that's what he's referring to there. You can tell I still have very fond memories about my experience, even though we were learning nonsense for 8 weeks. And he also refers to, I still can't believe you got away with that Father Ted anthem through the PA. So what happened there was Dudley Assembly Hall had, or maybe still has, I don't know, an emergency PA at the back of the platform for when the power goes down and if they need to evacuate the building. And we used to lark around in the main auditorium doing, we called it the untheocratic ministry school. So we used to just take it in turns to go on stage and try to make each other laugh with our style of giving talks or whatever. We used to just say nonsense on the platform at the Dudley Assembly Hall. And I found this kind of PA thing. It was a bit like, you know, in cop cars where they have this kind of thing on, like in old 80s TV shows, they'd have like the walkie-talkie on the end of like a spiral wire, wouldn't they? It was that sort of situation. So I took it off the wall and tested it, and it was really loud and booming. So I thought it'd be really funny if, because I had the Father Ted theme tune on my phone. Father Ted is a hilarious sitcom. If you haven't seen it before, please just find it. It's, I think, one of the most brilliant bits of comedy ever done on TV. Anyway, I had the Father Ted theme song. So I played it down the PA system, assuming it would just go out into the auditorium. What I didn't know was that the emergency PA was rigged to play in every room in the complex, including the office where our instructors were. So, yes, I don't know how I got away with it. I can remember being invited in to speak to one of the instructors, and I expected to get a real roasting over it. And basically there were two instructors. There was a good cop and a bad cop, and I got the good cop, and he got his Bible out, and he read to me a verse about, and I still can't remember quite what it says, but he says, "Lloyd, you have lots of enthusiasm. You bring lots of enthusiasm to our class, to the MTS course. All I want to say is, never lose that enthusiasm." And that was all he said. And they let me go. So that's what he's referring to there. So hopefully that's explained kind of the inside jokes. But again, hopefully you see from that message that Robin is just a really nice guy. And it could be that he ends up watching this part of my rebuttal. I kind of hope he does, to be honest. And Robin, if you are watching, I just want you to know that I love you. You know, I have never lost my fondness for you. Probably you feel very different towards me. Probably you deeply resent me talking about you on my channel. Certainly you will resent me making critical videos about the organization that you cherish. But hopefully you can respect the fact that now I'm no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm entitled to share my opinion. I'm entitled to comment on the convention that you have participated in and the dramatization that you have participated in. And again, the reason why I'm sharing the footage now of our time together in MTS, and the reason why I'm reading your message in my notebook, is to show my audience that you're a great guy. Because there are some in my audience who seem to think that all Jehovah's Witnesses are just stupid, and the elders in particular are mean, nasty, evil people. And assuming you're still an elder, you certainly were when I knew you, I hope it's obvious that that's just not true. That Jehovah's Witnesses, including elders, are mostly nice, kind, warm-hearted people. Frankly, that's the reason why I do the work that I do, why I exert so much energy at so much emotional cost in terms of the pushback I get from fellow ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and the hatred that some of them throw at me. The reason I I persist is, number one, because I don't want people to get hooked into this abusive and misleading organization that's going to waste so much of their time and has wasted years of our lives, more years of your life than mine. But I don't want people to be drawn in. But secondly, I kind of hope that people like you watching this will find it within themselves to just start asking a few questions. I really, really hope that you and others from my class, and frankly all Jehovah's Witnesses, can at some point give themselves permission to look behind the curtain, to subject their beliefs to objective scrutiny. Because if it's really true, what do you have to lose? I've told my viewers many times, it's a win-win scenario. If this is true, and what I'm saying is a lie, if my videos are brimming with lies, this should be immediately obvious. If I'm misquoting the organization, if I'm putting words in the mouths of the governing body, if I'm making false arguments or using logical fallacies, this will become immediately obvious, and your opinions, your views, your beliefs will be vindicated, and your faith will be stronger than it ever has been before. But if you're wrong, and if I'm right, you'll finally have the power to do something about it. You'll finally have the knowledge to break free mentally from this horrendous organization that's ruining so many lives. So that's why I've showed this video, because I want Jehovah's Witnesses to know that I don't hate them, and I want ex-Jehovah's Witnesses to know that Jehovah's Witnesses are not our enemies. They are mostly kind, warm-hearted, loving people, and they don't deserve to be taken for granted and led along with lies by the governing body.
I'll get back as soon as I can. Love you. Bye. Oh, no.
Lovely. Okay, we can go to it. There's a really nice one.
Hey, love. So sorry, gotta run.
Okay, I'll ring you about this week.
Thanks, love you both.
See you. The afternoon will look better.
Nana. Hello, Hayley, darling. I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's not too bad. I got this.
Oh.
How are you, though?
Thank you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, poor thing. Let me clear this up. Hello everyone, Hayley from Junior Design here, helping you to be effortlessly elegant. I want to welcome my new followers and thank everyone for subscribing to this channel. So first up, I got this gorgeous earring and necklace set. And as you can see, the first is I've done it this new tone. And that's great because it
Can you believe her?
Hayley's business feed.
But what makes this set really special giving you that understated elegance look. If you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button below, because as you know, when you look this good, you feel great.
Was the sister in this video boasting inappropriately? No. She was a humble servant of Jehovah, kindly and patiently helping her elderly relative. But do you recall her business website and the presentation she made about her jewelry products? She said, "When you look this good, you feel great." Her Christian sister was upset and took those comments and her actions to be boastful. Well, this video reminds us to think about how our words and our actions may appear to others.
We've been watching the first installment in a series of dramatizations spanning the Saturday afternoon of the 2022 Pursue Peace Convention. Again, this is kind of weird for me to be commenting on a dramatization featuring my friend Robin, who I was at MTS with, but credit where credit is due. Often with these dramatizations, they are hopelessly unrealistic. You watch them and you think, I'm sorry, that just does not happen in the real world. Here, for once, I was thinking, yes, that does happen quite a lot in the Jehovah's Witness community. There is a lot of snooping and there is a lot of inserting yourself in the business of others. And this culture of being a busybody, essentially, comes from the top. As Harold Corkin said in his summary comments,
well, this video reminds us to think about how our words and our actions may appear to others.
In the Jehovah's Witness religion, it doesn't matter whether your words and actions are proper. It doesn't matter whether there is anything wrong with your words and actions. It's all about how they appear to others. When you're a Jehovah's Witness, you constantly have to second guess the way your words or actions will be interpreted by other Jehovah's Witnesses, because they apparently have that kind of control over you. They are entitled to be offended if they can somehow justify it as being a response of their Christian conscience. And we're going to be hearing more about the conscience, or the Jehovah's Witness conscience, later in the Saturday afternoon session. But bottom line, this is typical of the way things work in a Jehovah's Witness congregation. What you have is this cobbled together, mismatched group of people who are forced to love each other. When you're a Jehovah's Witness, there is such a thing as compulsory love, or as they put it, agape. You have to love your fellow brothers in the congregation, even though the only thing you have in common is the religion. So we're talking, let's say there's 100 people in a congregation. I'm sure it's slightly less now in many congregations. But in my day, a typical number in a congregation would be 100. So let's say you have 100 people in a congregation. They could come from all walks of life. They could be all ages, all backgrounds, all personalities. And you have to get on with them. You have to consider them not just your friends, but your brothers. And what that inevitably means is that there is gossip. The Jehovah's Witness grapevine, when it swings into action, is something to behold. If you're in the same congregation as someone else, you feel entitled to know all of their business. Hardly anything of significance happens in a congregation to a person without the rest of the congregation finding out about it at lightning speed. And so what you have here is this sister whose name is Celia, looking after her nana, but she also, shock horror, has a jewelry business. And she's uploading videos to Quick Post, which I guess is their version of YouTube. She's uploading videos to promote her products, and Emily is choosing to watch these videos. No one's forcing Emily to watch the videos, by the way. She is going to the effort of going on Celia's website or going on Celia's Quick Post channel to watch her videos, whereupon she is feeling offended. And I'm here to tell you the Jehovah's Witness religion gives its followers no end of excuses to feel entitled when it comes to taking offense.
In the following dramatization, notice how envy threatens to disrupt peace.
Really? Bad news?
She's a sweetie. Reminds me, I want to speak to her about a necklace.
You too? You don't think she's showing off?
No.
Everyone thinks she's Miss Wonderful. She's starting to agree.
Is this just about Haley?
Seems it's all about Haley.
Your tea's getting cold.
And you're changing the subject.
No, but you've brought this up before. What is it? You're friends. You pioneer together.
Yeah, and that's why I'm concerned.
Concern is good. But is there just a little bit of envy in there?
What did you notice?
I noticed women being portrayed as gossipers and busybodies, if I'm being honest, Seth Hyatt. Seth is taking us through the talk, Put Away Peace Wreckers Envy, and as part of his talk, we're continuing in this dramatization, this essentially Jehovah's Witness soap opera, where much ado is being made of nothing. There's this immense fuss over videos someone is making to sell jewelry products. It's all a bit bizarre, if you ask me, not least because my old MTS mate is part of the cast. But I am noticing a mildly misogynistic tone to the dramatization. It seems that women in this congregation are the ones who are primarily occupied in being busybodies, in involving themselves in the affairs of others. And we're going to see more of that as this dramatization continues. And I also just wanted to comment on how extremely well everyone seems to be living. When you saw, is it Emily and Jake in their apartment or home earlier, it's this really sleek, modern space that they're living in. And I can imagine Jehovah's Witnesses in developing countries who are really struggling to make ends meet, watching this portrayal of their brothers and sisters in Western countries and thinking, is that really how everyone lives? And of course, it isn't how everyone lives. It isn't how all Jehovah's Witnesses live. But for some reason, typically when they do these dramatizations, they portray witnesses as living in these fabulous houses and apartments, and in this case, going to fancy coffee shops for their cups of tea.
What comes to your mind when you hear the word dishonesty? Maybe you think of Satan, the father of the lie. Or Ananias and his wife comes to your mind. They lost their lives because of lying. We do not want to imitate such ones. We avoid lying. Is that, though, as far as our honesty goes? Our holy God Jehovah wants us to be holy as well, and that is why he urged the ancient Israelites not to deceive others, as mentioned in Leviticus 19, verse 11. Does this not add some color to honesty? Dishonesty includes, and please take note of this definition, intentionally leading someone to a wrong conclusion. For example, by twisting the truth or by providing only certain details, we endanger our peace with others.
We're watching governing body helper Gaius Glockentin, who is part of the publishing committee. He is taking us through the symposium item, Put Away Peace Wreckers, Dishonesty. Yes, this apparently is an organization that simply will not do with lying and dishonesty. And as an example of dishonesty, we heard there the example of Ananias.
Or Ananias and his wife comes to your mind. They lost their lives because of lying. We do not want to imitate such ones.
Actually, Gaius, I don't want to imitate the God who killed Ananias and Sapphira for lying. If you actually look up the verse in Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 6, it's one of those verses where you read it as a Jehovah's Witness and you can't help but just scratch your head and think, what just happened there? So let's read it together. However, a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, sold some property, but he secretly held back some of the price with his wife's knowledge, and he brought just a part of it and deposited it at the feet of the apostles. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan emboldened you to lie to the Holy Spirit and secretly hold back some of the price of the field? As long as it remained with you, did it not remain yours? And after it was sold, was it not in your control? Why have you thought up such a deed as this in your heart? You have lied not to men, but to God. On hearing these words, Ananias collapsed and died, and great fear came over all those who heard about it. Then the younger men rose, wrapped him in cloths, carried him out, and buried him. So what we're led to believe happened here is that Ananias and Sapphira told the apostles that they would sell their property and give the proceeds to the apostles, but instead of giving all of the proceeds, which they weren't forced to give, I mean, this was a voluntary donation. Instead of giving all of the proceeds, they gave a percentage of the proceeds and left the apostles under the illusion that they were getting all of the proceeds, which arguably is shifty behavior. Yes, it's lying. Yes, it's dishonest. But which is worse, lying and dishonesty or murder? Because that's what happens to Ananias and Sapphira because of this. So apparently, if you tell a lie, if you're dishonest in any way, you are worthy of instant death. That's what happened. And this is supposed to be one of those verses in the Bible, or a verse in the Bible, from which we can derive profound moral insight and wisdom. I'm sorry, I'm just not seeing it. I'm seeing a truly messed up story. Anyway, let's get back to the topic at hand. Again, Gaius Glockentin wants to impress upon Jehovah's Witnesses the need to be honest.
Dishonesty includes, and please take note of this definition, intentionally leading someone to a wrong conclusion. For example, by twisting the truth or by providing only certain details, we endanger our peace with others.
Once more, I'd like to draw your attention to a video I made titled Lying for Jehovah. Thumbnail here if Tibor is gracious, and we know he always is, apart from that one time. So this is a video I made with actual video examples of Watchtower representatives, including governing body member Jeffrey Jackson, telling lies in defense of the Jehovah's Witness organization. And this is actually a strategy that is approved by the organization and indeed enshrined in its literature. It's a strategy referred to as theocratic warfare. And I have a little anecdote to share with you regarding my father. I don't really care about embarrassing him at this point because he's been shunning me for years anyway. My father, like me, went to the ministerial training school. When I went, it was called the Ministerial Training School in 2005. Some years later, because he was a widower, he got invited to the rebranded Bible School for Single Brothers, BSSB. And this was before it finally got named what it is now, the School for Kingdom Evangelizers. He got an invitation himself to attend this elite school for Jehovah's Witnesses. And I'll never forget having a phone conversation with him, because you have to bear in mind that before he started shunning me, we were talking quite a bit on Skype and keeping in touch with each other, even after the point where he knew that I had a problem with the organization and no longer considered it to be God's one and only true organization. So long as I wasn't disassociated or disfellowshipped, he felt comfortable speaking to me. And he went to the BSSB school, and I was actually quite intrigued about him going, to the point where I helped him put his notes together. So when you're a student, you take lots of notes, and I used my notes from 2005 to help him organize his notes in 2011. I actually had a bound book printed for him with all of the sections in it as like a gift. I guess at that point, even though I was awake to it not being true, I still kind of carried a bit of a candle for the principle of going to this school and being studious and taking in information. Anyway, we were in quite close contact at that point. And I remember one day having a conversation with him, and he was quite excited about something he'd learned in one of the lessons. And I'm not quoting verbatim, obviously, but he said something along the lines of, "Lloyd, you'll never guess what we learned today. We learned in the classroom that sometimes it's okay to lie. And it's actually in the insight book under lie." And I was on the phone thinking, okay, I don't quite remember that lesson. And also, how is this a good thing? How is this something that you're excited about? But okay, thanks for sharing. To this day, that conversation kind of disturbs me a little bit, because number one, how can you have an organization that literally calls itself the truth, giving people permission to lie? And number two, how is this something that you could actually be excited about to the point where that's something that you would share with your son? That's something that you would actually be proud of having permission to lie. Anyway, in case you think I'm making all of this up, let's look at the Insight book. The Insight on the Scriptures is a 2-volume encyclopedia written by Jehovah's Witnesses. It's their attempt at being scholarly when it comes to the Bible and putting all of the Bible-related subjects in alphabetical order. And under lie, it says the following: the opposite of truth. Lying generally involves saying something false to a person who is entitled to know the truth, and doing so with the intent to deceive or to injure him or another person. So right out of the gate, right in the first sentence, there's a caveat. It's only lying if the person is entitled to know the truth. And then further down in the article, you get a bit more information along these lines. While malicious lying is definitely condemned in the Bible, this does not mean that a person is under obligation to divulge truthful information to people who are not entitled to it. Jesus Christ counseled, "Do not give what is holy to dogs, neither throw your pearls before swine, that they may never trample them under their feet and turn around and rip you open." That is why Jesus on certain occasions refrained from giving full information or direct answers to certain questions, when doing so could have brought unnecessary harm. Evidently, the course of Abraham, Isaac, Rahab, and Elisha in misdirecting or in withholding full facts from non-worshippers of Jehovah must be viewed in the same light. Jehovah God allows an operation of error to go to persons who prefer falsehood, that they may get to believing the lie rather than the good news about Jesus Christ. So there it is in black and white. Jehovah's Witnesses, in certain situations, if they feel that someone isn't entitled to the truth, have permission to lie.
Let us now continue to watch the next segment of the dramatization. We left Emily and Celia sitting in a coffee shop. Please watch carefully and notice how Emily is tempted to alter the truth.
I know, and that's why I'm concerned.
Concern is good, but is there just a little bit of envy in there?
I thought you would understand.
I think I understand your feelings.
Not about Haley.
I haven't seen all her posts. There's nothing immoral, is there?
No.
Good. That's not like her. Now, if it's a case of her being more careful how she comes across, that's another matter. Why don't you talk to her?
Maybe.
Emily, you are a beautiful spiritual sister. You know, for years, I had a bad habit comparing myself to others. My own insecurity hurt me and my closest friends.
So you don't think I should have spoken to Celia?
Oh, I'm glad you've asked Celia about it. Someone you trust. What did she say?
Well, she definitely understands how I feel.
Good. And about Haley's posts?
Well, she hasn't seen everything she has out there. She did say that Haley needs to be more careful how she comes across.
What did she suggest?
That I should tell her that she needs to stop, but I'm too worked up.
Look, if Celia agrees that Hayley's doing something she shouldn't, you should talk to her. You'll find the right time.
Thanks for understanding. Hungry. Can you say the prayer?
Sure. Jehovah, we would like to praise you for your generosity and kindness.
I'm sorry, I just can't get over how weird it is to see Robin, my former classmate at MTS, who's playing Jake. It feels so strange for us to be in this situation where he is in this piece of cult propaganda and it's my job to point out the flaws. I guess there aren't that many flaws in what we've just seen. If anything, this is again quite a rare example of a dramatization that is realistic. We have Jehovah's Witnesses gossiping about each other, getting their feathers all ruffled up because of something that someone's doing that they feel they shouldn't be doing, when in fact it's all very irrelevant. None of it's really important. We're talking about social media posts about jewelry. No one's been killed. No one's been robbed. There's absolutely nothing serious happening at all. And yet, not only do you have gossiping and people talking behind each other's backs, and as I've already pointed out, isn't it interesting that it's mostly women who are portrayed as doing this? We're going to see Jake, or Robin, do this a bit at the Kingdom Hall as this dramatization progresses. But mostly it's women, apparently, who behave in this way, or at least that's the message I'm picking up from this dramatization. It's, again, just a bit misogynistic in its portrayal of women. But what it absolutely gets right is that Jehovah's Witnesses are as prone to treating each other in an abominable way as members of any other religion. We have not just gossiping, we have lying. And there we have Emily being told by her friend Celia, now if it's a case of her being more careful, her being Hayley, how she comes across, that's another matter. Why don't you talk to her? And these words are jumbled up and rearranged by Emily when she's talking to Jake. She did say that Hayley needs to be more careful how she comes across, which obviously isn't what Celia said. And Jake then says, what did she suggest? Emily, that I should tell her that she needs to stop, but I'm too worked up. So a complete perversion of the actual advice that Emily was given. But I don't think there's anything strange or anything unusual or unrealistic about what's being shown here. I think this is typical, quite frankly, of the way Jehovah's Witnesses treat each other. They like to think they are an organization that's all about love, a love that never fails. But the hard reality, which I'm grateful is finally being captured in this dramatization, is that Jehovah's Witnesses are just as capable of being mean and horrible to each other as anyone else.
In the following dramatization, notice the effect that harmful gossip can have on the peace in a congregation.
Can you believe that? Especially as a pioneer. What kind of example is she setting?
Has Emily stopped following her?
No, not yet, but she probably will. Alistair, what do you think?
About what?
Hayley's posts on Quick Post.
Is there a problem?
Emily's told me they're all just look at me. My clothes, my hair, my makeup. And even Celia agrees with her.
Well, it's very easy to take things out of context on social media. I know that I've done that and realised later that I was wrong.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Listen, I don't want to pull you away, but if you have a minute, would you mind giving me a hand with these boxes?
Sure.
Thanks for your help.
No problem.
Jake, back in the hall, I know you were just expressing concern, but here's something to consider. This principle is one of my favorites. It's found in Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 17.
The first to state his case seems right until the other party comes and cross-examines him. I'm not sure I understand.
It just means that sometimes we only hear one side of a story. And until we personally hear both, it's best not to draw any conclusions. And even then, if it's something negative, we wouldn't want to spread it, any more than we want something spread about ourselves.
I hadn't considered that. Thanks. I'm going to apologise to Harry and Marie. And have Emily talk directly to Hayley.
Good idea.
We're watching governing body helper Patrick Lafranca give his part of the symposium, Put Away Peace Wreckers, Harmful Gossip. And to help him with his talk, he's showing us the continuing saga of Emily and Hayley and Celia and Jake. It doesn't really have a title that I'm aware of, but if it had a title, I would suggest Hayley makes a jewelry video and things escalate quickly. That's essentially what this is about. A woman makes a jewelry video, and because the Jehovah's Witness culture is so invasive and everyone's in everyone else's business, it all blows hugely out of proportion. So anyway, this particular part of the soap opera is very interesting. There were 3 moments in particular I wanted to talk about. The first being...
Listen, I don't want to pull you away, but if you have a minute, would you mind giving me a hand with these boxes?
But you did want to pull him away, didn't you? It turns out that was exactly the point of getting Jake to help with the boxes. It was an opportunity to pull him away and counsel him about his gossiping. So straight away we have a contradiction with what was touched on in only the previous symposium item, handled by Gaius Glockentin, Put Away Peace Wreckers, Dishonesty. So we've just had an entire talk about the importance of honesty and not lying. And here we have Alistair, as the character is called. His real name, or the name of the real person, is Steve Papps, who, if I'm not mistaken, is actually a Britain Branch Committee member. Straight away you have Alistair using deception to achieve an aim, which, as I've explained already in this rebuttal, is a Jehovah's Witness strategy. The next moment I wanted to discuss, and it's really the most profound moment if you're watching this as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, is the following.
The first to state his case seems right until the other party comes and cross-examines him. I'm not sure I understand.
It just means that sometimes we only hear one side of a story. And until we personally hear both,
It's best not to draw any conclusions.
I wholeheartedly agree with this proverb, and I rejoice whenever Jehovah's Witness propaganda inadvertently drops in a pearl of wisdom that can be turned right back on the organization. And this is actually a point that I picked up from Harrison Kotha, who runs the Truth Hurts channel. It was a verse, I think, that he mentioned to his elders when he was first being questioned over his own apostasy. He brought up this verse in Proverbs 18, verse 17. The first to state his case seems right until the other party comes and cross-examines him. And he used it on the organization. The organization is coming along to Jehovah's Witnesses and to people who are being recruited into Jehovah's Witnesses, and it is presenting a case. And many people are persuaded by that case. It's a case that goes something like this. God has only one true organization on the earth. It's his approved channel with mankind. And specifically, there are 8 guys in upstate New York who are being used as this channel with mankind. And we need to listen to what they have to say, because otherwise we will be destroyed at an impending Armageddon. That's the Jehovah's Witness message in a nutshell. It's their case. And many people, for whatever reason, usually because they've been indoctrinated from childhood, find that case compelling. But what Jehovah's Witnesses also do is they say, nobody question this. Nobody look at what critics have to say. Nobody cross-examine us. Nobody is allowed to do any objective research or listen to what former members have to say when they are refuting our claims. That is the position that this organization takes. Actually, when you look at the footnote to cross-examines, until the other party comes and cross-examines him, the footnote reads in the New World Translation, or searches him through. This is an organization that doesn't let you search it through. It literally withholds historical literature from the rank and file. As I've established on this channel, when you are a Bethel elder, your Watchtower online library takes you all the way back to the 19th century when it comes to digitized Jehovah's Witness publications, so that you can research as far back as you like. They have that capability, which they could easily extend to all Jehovah's Witnesses, but they only allow not just only Bethelites, but only Bethel elders to have access to this material, because it's embarrassing. Because when you actually research the organization's history, and particularly its own literature, it quickly becomes apparent that this is a scam. The Jehovah's Witness case falls apart. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching my rebuttals this convention season and you take nothing else away from them, please, I beg of you, ponder this verse and how easily it can be applied to the organization that demands your loyalty. And finally, I just wanted to pick up on what gets said in the car park towards the end of that clip, where Jake says,
Thanks. I'm going to apologise to Harry and Marie. And have Emily talk directly to Hayley.
Interesting wording that, isn't it? I'm going to have Emily talk directly to Hayley. Not, I'm going to ask Emily to talk to Hayley. Not, I'm going to recommend that Emily talks directly to Hayley, but I'm going to have Emily talk directly to Hayley, which implies Emily is going to be ordered. Emily is going to receive an order from her husband, who is her spiritual head. So I love the fact that because the writers of this propaganda are so lacking in self-awareness, because they are so indoctrinated, and they live in this bubble where nothing ever gets cross-examined, as I was explaining earlier, stuff like this just gets woven in to their propaganda, and you get clues, you get breadcrumbs pointing to the true nature of the organization. In this case, just how sexist and misogynistic it truly is.
In the following dramatization, notice how a person might be tempted to give in to anger.
Yes, Nana?
Don't forget eggs, dear.
No, I didn't forget.
Are you sure, love?
No, I won't forget.
Thank you so much.
Okay, love you. Bye. No.
Haley, finally, I've caught you. Do you have a minute?
Hi, Emily. Can we talk later? I'm really struggling this morning.
Do you know, it's just, you've been so busy and I've been waiting for the right moment. I'd really just like to address it.
Okay, what's up?
It's just that I've noticed your posts lately on Quick Posts.
What about them?
Well, do you really think there's something that a pioneer should be posting?
What are you talking about?
Some people might think you're bragging.
Some people? What people? It's a business account. I've got to show off my products.
I know, I get that. It's just, I don't know, it could feel like you're drawing a little too much attention to yourself.
Who would think like that? You?
No.
This is gonna end right here, right now. Let's dance, dickweed.
You wanna dance, Ronnie? I want a polka.
Not just me. Celia felt the same.
You spoke to Celia about this.
I didn't want to upset you. Jake said that I needed to say...
Jake said everyone thinks my posts are inappropriate.
Not everyone, Haley. That's not what I'm saying at all.
You are such... You're just such a gossip!
I'm not gossiping. I'm just trying to help you if you would just listen to me.
You're just jealous into me. Oh, yeah, listen to this. And I expected more from you.
Haley, what's she talking about?
Gossiping about my posts. Are you that lonely that you've got nothing better to do?
Haley? Wait, please.
Were you left feeling a bit tense?
Not really. I found the whole thing hilarious, to be honest. So this is this is Kenneth Cook, governing body member, presenting the final talk of the symposium, Put Away Peace Wreckers. And this particular symposium piece, as you might be able to guess, deals with uncontrolled anger. Yes, that's what's just been depicted in this ongoing saga. What were we calling it? Haley makes a jewelry video and things escalate quickly. You'll forgive me if I draw parallels with the Anchorman scene, which is like one of my all-time favorite comedy moments. It's just insane, isn't it? Someone makes a jewelry video, and because of the judgmental, backbiting, gossiping culture that Jehovah's Witnesses watching this will immediately relate to because they've had first-hand experience of it, something as innocent as a video about jewelry can completely be blown out of context. So I can imagine you watching this video as someone with no experience with Jehovah's Witnesses and just being completely bewildered and confused as to how this could even be a realistic situation. No, this is realistic. This is the sort of stuff that I could easily imagine happening, even though you might find it, and I find it, hilarious to see Jehovah's Witnesses going at each other in the Kingdom Hall car park over something so trivial. I'm afraid this is actually a realistic portrayal of the inevitable consequences of putting Jehovah's Witnesses together in a congregation, people of different personalities, different backgrounds, people who otherwise would not be friends, and forcing them to not just be friends with each other, but to love each other.
Peace must be sought above all. Our military forces are committed to peace.
We have chosen peace.
Our wish, our prayer is for peace.
We yearn for peace. We pray for peace.
For thousands of years, humans have tried to find peace. Peace as individuals. Peace as families. Peace for the entire human race.
We want to lay the foundation of peace for generations to come. We want to do the hard work now so our children and our grandchildren can grow up in a peaceful world.
The future we want. Opportunity and security for our families, a rising standard of living, a sustainable, peaceful planet for our kids. All that is within our reach.
Yet, despite humans' best efforts, peace has been elusive. For millenniums, rulers and governments have tried to achieve peace through treaties, resolutions, summits, and, ironically, war.
We've been watching the opening 2 minutes of a new documentary being shown to Jehovah's Witnesses at their 2022 Pursue Peace Convention. The title of the documentary is Jehovah Guides Us in the Way of Peace. And as we've seen there, they have set the stage by showing archive footage of various world leaders and politicians talking about their desire for peace. Whether their desire is genuine or just words, I guess it all depends on the individual. But if we're going to be fair, don't they at least get to try? Isn't it the job of elected representatives, of political leaders, to at least try to pursue peace or encourage peace? If nothing else, just encourage peace in their words. Isn't that their job? The opposite would be encouraging war and pursuing war. And I don't know of that many successful political leaders who are all about war and who enjoy massive success because they promise war to people. Of course, you're going to find any number of examples throughout the decades, throughout history, of human leaders wanting peace and expressing this. It's actually kind of strange to watch political leaders going back as recently as the likes of Barack Obama and George Bush in Jehovah's Witness propaganda, you have to bear in mind that I grew up with this idea of not showing political leaders in that way. You'd occasionally see illustrations in the publications, but it's very strange for them to actually show the footage in this way. Maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just an old timer, but this will surely grate on some Jehovah's Witnesses who are like, whoa, now we're showing Barack Obama in our propaganda videos. This is getting intense. So it will be a shock to the system, I'm sure, but I guess what I'm trying to say is the entire premise here is disingenuous. They are pointing the finger at a succession of figures, of leaders, who've at least tried to find a way to peace. And they are promoting their ideology as being the true way to peace. And there is intense irony in the following words.
For millenniums, rulers and governments have tried to achieve peace through treaties, resolutions, summits, and, ironically, war.
Ironically, war. War has been used to try to achieve peace. You know, like the War of Armageddon. Do they not connect the dots when they're writing this? Do they not think, oh, hang on, that sort of applies to what our ideology says? That's the Jehovah's Witness belief in a nutshell. We're going to fix the problem of there not being peace on our world with this global war that's going to kill billions of people.
Now, this was no ordinary storm. It was so severe that the ship was in danger of being wrecked.
Captain! We're taking on too much water! The storm is for the gods!
The crew cried out to their gods, but Jonah knew the true source of the storm. And now he accepts personal responsibility for the situation.
Lift me up and throw me into the sea, and the sea will calm down for you. For I know that it's because of me that this violent storm has come upon you.
Can you imagine the courage it took for Jonah to make this request? He had no way of knowing if Jehovah would save him, but he did not want others to perish on his account. In his mercy, Jehovah spares Jonah's life.
How am I still alive? What will become of me?
When faced with a difficult assignment, Jonah got up to run away from Jehovah, to Tarshish. Jonah's conscience had to bother him. He had to be questioning his decision. He tried to take matters into his own hands, tried to find his own peace. Where does he find himself? In the belly of a fish. Yet he calls to Jehovah in a moment of despair.
Oh, Jehovah, out of the depths of the grave, I cried to you for help. Please hear my voice. What I have vowed, I will pay.
Jonah could have reasoned that this was the end of his assignment as Jehovah's prophet. After all, he did disobey direction. So likely he was surprised to hear the word of Jehovah come to him a second time.
Jonah, get up, go to Nineveh, the great city, and proclaim to her the message that I tell you.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
At first, Jonah trusted in himself and didn't understand that Jehovah would protect him from the violent Assyrians. But after being given a second chance, what happens? Well, then he puts aside his human concerns and looks to Jehovah for protection. If Jehovah's asked you to do something, if he's asked me to do something, if he's leading us, he absolutely will guide us through it. Jonah's account proves this.
Although the Ninevites were spared because they repented, that's true, Assyria later returned to its evil, wicked ways.
Sorry to interrupt, I'm sure you are finding all of this very riveting, but I do need to add a bit of commentary, otherwise I'll get done for copyright violation. We've just been watching about 3.5 minutes, sorry that was quite a long clip, of the documentary Jehovah Guides Us in the Way of Peace. What's happening here, manifestly, is they are doing a recap of the previous few years of Jehovah's Witness conventions, the dramas, the Bible dramas that were shown to Jehovah's Witnesses at those conventions are all being put together as some kind of tribute video. And to make sense of it all, they've done it with the appearance of a documentary, even though the talking heads they've chosen are not experts, they're not scholars. As you can see from the captions, they're literally just governing body helpers. So it's people who are literally writing the script to this video, delivering the script, but doing so in such a way as to make it look like they're being interviewed, which the equivalent would be me doing my videos in this way. Instead of just speaking to you, I would be speaking to somebody who is not really there because I'm staring at a wall, but I would be delivering my information in this way, as though you're listening in on a conversation and I'm being interviewed because of my immense knowledge in this particular field. The reality, of course, is that everything I'm saying is being said to effectively a brick wall. I'm deciding beforehand what I want to say without being prompted, and therefore it's not an interview. It's not an interview. And the fact that they can insult our intelligence in this way by trying to make it look like an interview is just mind-boggling. And the problem you have when you lean on a bunch of deluded cult followers, which is what the governing body helpers are, they haven't risen through the ranks in the organization thanks to their intelligence or thanks to their knowledge of Bible history and scholarship. They have risen through the ranks due to their ability to say one syllable. Yes, that's what's got them to their position of governing body helper, going along with whatever they have been told and perpetuating whatever narrative the governing body feeds them. They're masquerading as experts, even though they're not. And doesn't it show in the utter tripe they are spewing about the story of Jonah? And what I've decided to do, rather than repeat all of the points I've made over the years about these dramas that are now being shown again, I'm just going to point you to the rebuttals. So if Tibor is gracious, here is the thumbnail to my rebuttal of the Jonah video. It goes without saying that this isn't a historically accurate narrative. I don't think it was even intended as a historically accurate narrative. It is essentially a parable. It's giving a message. It's a story that's intended to inspire and entertain. And it uses the well-worn literary device of exaggeration and hyperbole. Jonah gets assigned to go to the Assyrians, so instead he gets in a boat and goes to the opposite end of the Mediterranean. An exaggeration. Jonah falls into the sea, and because God wants him to get on with his mission, he has a fish digest his prophet so that he can get submarine transportation back to dry land so that he can continue with his mission. Of course, none of this happened. As I explained in my rebuttal, if we're going to say that it was a whale shark, which is what's depicted here, it is anatomically impossible to be swallowed by a whale shark. Their mouths just won't allow a human being to pass through into their digestive system. And if they could somehow have a human being beamed into their digestive system, let's just bypass the whole mouth thing and the fact that there isn't an orifice big enough to stick a human through it. Let's just beam someone straight into the guts of a giant fish. I'm sure someone could just crouch there and be able to say a prayer and maybe sit there for a few days on end until the fish gets him to wherever he needs to go. Anyone who knows anything about basic biology understands that the stomach isn't some kind of luggage compartment. It's not like a backup seating area. It's a place that's full of acid. Acid that can eat through almost anything, especially in the case of sharks. So Jonah's praying to God to help him while his flesh is being stripped from him due to the stomach acids of the whale shark. Come on. You know, we've grown beyond this. This isn't what Bible scholars say really happened. All you need to do is just some basic research into this. But they're counting on you, especially if you're watching this as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, to just not do any research at all and to just take their word for it. And if we do take their word for it, if we do take everything at face value, oh yes, Jonah got swallowed by a whale shark, even though it was anatomically impossible. God just did it because God likes to confuse us sometimes and make things happen that are impossible to test our faith. So it really, really did happen, and Jonah got transported by the whale shark so he could continue his mission of telling the Assyrians how naughty they were and getting them to repent. Even if you allow for all that, what is the end product?
Although the Ninevites were spared because they repented, that's true, Assyria later returned to its evil, wicked ways.
So the plan didn't work. Jehovah goes to all of this trouble to arrange submarine transportation for one of his prophets. He goes through all of this theatre and all of this pantomime to get them to temporarily repent, and then they go back to their wicked ways. So why go to all of that trouble? The story just doesn't make sense, even if you take everything at face value once you understand the context, once you understand what eventually ended up happening with the Assyrian Empire. It was again a parable, clearly not intended to be taken literally. I actually sometimes wonder what it would be like if the writers of this stuff could be transported forward in time and be shown how the consequences of what they were writing down on a sheet of paper, hoping to just inspire people or amuse people or entertain people, it would be really interesting to see how they would react if you brought them forward in time to show them that in the 21st century, people are taking their stories seriously to the point of portraying them in HD film productions, and then years after making these films, they're getting essentially the makers of the films, the people responsible for the propaganda, to pretend to be interviewed and talk again about how this mad fish story really happened and how it carries profound relevance for the modern day.
This is what Jehovah says. Look, a son named Josiah will be born to the house of David. And he will sacrifice on you the priests of the high places, those making sacrificial smoke on you, and he will burn human bones on you.
That prophecy, made over 300 years earlier, confirmed that Josiah was the one prophesied to act against false worship. This may have given Josiah even greater incentive and courage to continue his campaign, which now included repairing the temple. These actions contributed to the peaceful conditions that elevated pure worship. Josiah did so much to restore pure worship. That is why we love him. Yet the people's heart condition remained polluted, so the nation required severe discipline. Jeremiah prophesied the conquest of the Babylonians against Judah.
All this land will be reduced to ruins, and this land and its inhabitants will have to serve the king of Babylon for 70 years.
Daniel himself may have heard Jeremiah speak those words, and he certainly saw it come true as he and his family were exiled to Babylon. Talk about peace being interrupted. Daniel was a young Judean prince taken from his homeland and separated from his family.
So we've just been watching more of the documentary Jehovah Guides Us in the Way of Peace. Again, I don't want to go over in detail all of the problems in all of the dramas they are now showing and commenting on as though they are experts. If Tibor is gracious, a thumbnail will appear to my rebuttal of the Josiah drama, which was a hideous piece of propaganda. I mean, to be fair, they were giving a fairly accurate portrayal of what's described in the Josiah narrative, namely a fanatical zealot king who chases down and murders anyone who doesn't subscribe to the state religion. That's essentially the story of Josiah. But of course, it's not about just bringing the Bible to life. It's not about just depicting Bible stories. It's about making Bible stories apply to the governing body, to the Jehovah's Witness organization. And in that context, you have this story of Josiah being used to dehumanize apostates and normalize the concept of people who disagree with the leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses being killed at some point, namely in an impending Armageddon. So that's the story they're referring to. And again, rather than go over all of the details, just watch my previous rebuttal. What I want to do at this point is just start fact-checking, because already we're seeing a number of things said that are spurious at best and at worst downright untrue. And before I go into this, to avoid accusations of nitpicking, you know, because I can imagine Jehovah's Witnesses watching this and hearing my replies to some of these dubious statements and saying, oh, well, that's just nitpicking. Well, let's remember the standard of accuracy that Jehovah's Witnesses apply to their own spiritual food.
This month, I'd like to talk about the efforts Jehovah's organization is making to produce literature, publications, articles that are as accurate as possible. we're going to talk about accuracy of statement. Our goal is to provide information that is as accurate as possible, because we know that you brothers and sisters use this information. You quote it in the field ministry. You use it in your public talks. And so we want to make sure that our brothers are fed with the most accurate spiritual food possible.
So the research work we're doing, sometimes it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. Sometimes we don't find what we were expecting to find. But it's very gratifying because we're helping produce accurate information that our readers can rely on. Reliable information will help us make good, informed decisions.
Anyone who reads our journal, who sees our videos, can be confident, well, this was thoroughly researched. These are facts. This is the truth.
This was thoroughly researched. These are the facts. This is the truth. That's the confidence that Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to have in all spiritual food, including videos, as we've just heard. So they set this high standard of accuracy. So using this high standard of accuracy, because they're supposed to meticulously research everything that they say or write about, let's revisit what we've seen already in the documentary. You'll remember where Mark Numer says,
that prophecy, made over 300 years earlier, confirmed that Josiah was the one prophesied to act against false worship.
Mark Numer, who is not a Bible scholar, who has no credentials in Bible scholarship or history or archaeology, asserts that the words found in 1 Kings 13 verse 2 were a prophecy that was made 300 years before the fact. So in the days of Jeroboam, apparently it was predicted that someone named Josiah would be born to the house of David. Mark Numer is entitled to his opinion if he likes the idea that 300 years before Josiah was predicted to one day become king. If he finds this thought pleasing, that's entirely his deal, whatever does it for him. But it's inexcusable for him to be stating this as fact in front of millions of people. The reality is that the book of 1 Kings, if you check what Bible scholars have to say that is, the book of 1 Kings was written in the same period as Josiah, as the book of Josiah. In other words, Josiah very likely commissioned this prophecy to be written about him, and written in such a way that it was apparently made centuries earlier. If you don't believe me, there's a really interesting Wikipedia page, which I've referred to previously, dating the Bible. It gives you a summary of roughly the periods of time in which certain Bible books were written. And if Tibor is gracious, perhaps we can look at the first row in the chart. You see there the monarchic period, the 8th to 7th centuries BCE. So 745 to 586 BCE is the earliest period in which the books of the Old Testament began to be written, according to scholars. Just let that sink in for a moment. So the Torah, the Pentateuch, wasn't written by Moses. It's kind of obvious if you think about it, because one of the books supposedly written by Moses describes his death. So anyway, the first few books in the Old Testament started to be written in this monarchic period. And you can see there in the second bullet point, it says 7th century Nahum, based on its assumption of the fall of Thebes and call for the destruction of Nineveh. Zephaniah, in the reign of Josiah, 649 to 609 BCE. Habakkuk, possibly shortly before the Battle of Carchemish, 605 BCE, first edition of the Deuteronomistic history, books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, in the reign of Josiah. So Kings, the book that Jeremiah is quoting from, was written in the time of the king who was supposedly prophesied in that particular passage of scripture. This is the work of Bible scholars. This is the conclusion of clever people who've devoted their careers to understanding who wrote the Bible, where it comes from, to what extent can we take things literally, etc. If you want to take a literalist view, if you want to take this position that everything mentioned in the Bible really happened, and if you want to adopt this chronology that places Bible authorship way further back in time than was the reality according to what we know, fair enough, go for it. It's just that you can't expect to be taken seriously. And in Mark Neumair's case, what you're doing is showing how narrow-minded and frankly illiterate you are when it comes to Bible scholarship, when it comes to the subject that you are posing as an expert in, pretending to be interviewed on this subject of Bible history. You also have Robert Lucioni saying the following.
Talk about peace being interrupted. Daniel was a young Judean prince taken from his homeland and separated from his family.
So let's just remember for a moment how accurate all of this information is supposed to be. Apparently everything gets cross-checked. Apparently there's a dedicated research team who goes over all of these details and makes sure that every last word is true. And yet you have Robert Lucioni claiming that Daniel was a young Judean prince. Well, that is simply not true. And I'm not just talking about the fact that the entire character of Daniel was essentially made up, that the book of Daniel is itself a forgery, as I've explained before on the channel. Dr. Richard Carrier has even written a brilliant article on his website explaining how we know that the book of Daniel is a forgery, that it was made up, essentially, by people long ago as a means of manipulating and controlling people with this false historical narrative. But even if we put all of that to one side and believe that Daniel really existed, even if we take the Bible at face value and as Bible literalists insist that Daniel was a historical figure and everything said about him in the Bible really happened, does the Bible say that Daniel was a Judean prince? I think I know where Robert Lucioni has got this from. I think he's getting his information from the Insight volumes. Volume 1, to be precise. Remember, the Insight volumes are essentially the Jehovah's Witness self-written encyclopedia on the Bible. If you go to the subject of Daniel in the Insight volumes, again in volume 1, it says under point 2, an outstanding prophet of Jehovah of the tribe of Judah, the writer of the book bearing his name. Very little is known of his early life, but he tells of being taken to Babylon, likely as a teenage prince, along with other royal offspring and nobles. So already there's a little bit more ambiguity, isn't there? Robert Lucioni says that Daniel was a young Judean prince. And then in the Insight book, which he's clearly drawing from, or the people writing his script are clearly drawing from, it says likely as a teenage prince. And it gives us Daniel 1 verses 3 to 6, on which it bases this thing about Daniel likely being a prince. And then when you go to that portion of scripture, It says, Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief court official, to bring some of the Israelites, including those of royal and noble descent. They were to be youths without any defect, of good appearance, endowed with wisdom, knowledge, and discernment, and capable of serving in the king's palace. He was to teach them the writing and the language of the Chaldeans. Furthermore, the king assigned to them a daily ration from the king's delicacies and from the wine he drank. They were to be trained for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to enter the king's service. Now among them were some from the tribe of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So hopefully you caught this. Here it doesn't say that Daniel was a Judean prince, and this would have been an appropriate moment to make that clear, wouldn't it? If he really was a Judean prince, just say it. But what it actually says in the book of Daniel, if we're going to be taking this at face value, is that a group of young men were rounded up, including those of royal and noble descent, implying that not everyone in the group was of royal and noble descent. Therefore, Robert Lucioni's assertion that Daniel was a Judean prince is just wrong.
As this system comes to a close, we will find ourselves in situations that test our courage and threaten our peace. We will have to stand up for pure worship, just like Josiah, and this will be unpopular. But with Jehovah on our side, we can face those situations with confidence. He's all-powerful, and He's going to help us through it.
Now, here's the interesting thing. Some of the prophecies that Daniel recorded applied not only to the future of the Babylonian Empire, but also outline world events to our day and beyond. And these events are being fulfilled right before our very eyes.
We've just been watching the concluding comments from part 1 of the Jehovah's Witness documentary, Jehovah Guides Us in the Way of Peace. Sorry, just for a moment there, I thought I was being interviewed. Yeah, I guess I don't have to pretend I'm being interviewed. I can just be open about the fact that I'm conveying information, even if those guys are being quite shady about it. So, yes, concluding comments of the documentary Jehovah Guides Us in the Way of Peace. You heard there from William Malenfant this doomsday nonsense about Bible prophecies being fulfilled today, right in front of our very eyes. You also heard from Robo-Ron, as I like to call him, Ronald Curzon, who said,
We will have to stand up for pure worship, just like Josiah, and this will be unpopular. But with Jehovah on our side, we can face those situations with confidence.
Unpopular, Ronald? You mean the part where Josiah is chasing down priests of Baal and hacking them down in cold blood as part of some jihad? You mean that kind of unpopular? I think people would be right to be appalled at that sort of savagery, at that sort of extremism, which actually lies at the root of Jehovah's Witness ideology. If the world were being run, if the planet were being run by the governing body, what we saw in the Josiah drama, and again, here is a thumbnail to my full rebuttal if Tibor is gracious, what we saw in the Josiah drama was a chilling vision of how nonconformists would be treated in such a dystopia. If the governing body had their way, wouldn't they be doing exactly the same thing with apostates, literally chasing them down and killing them? And in fact, isn't that the teaching? Isn't that the belief that they have? That one day soon, They will be effectively raptured to heaven so that they can take part in the slaughter at Armageddon. So effectively, they'll all be doing very soon in their muddled minds the thing that they celebrate Josiah doing in the drama that Ronald is referring to.
In the following dramatization, note what helps one sister to overlook an offense.
And I expected more from you. Hayley, what are you talking about? Gossiping. About my posts. Are you that lonely that you've got nothing better to do?
Hayley? Wait, please. I don't know what's happening.
Did you talk to Emily about my posts?
Well, yes, we did.
So you gossiped about me?
No, I
looked up to you. You're supposed to be the mature one, and you're just like Emily, busy running your mouth.
Hayley! Look, I can see you're upset. But trust me, this is a huge misunderstanding. I love you. I would never, ever say anything behind your back. So please, calm down.
Sometimes I just feel so alone. Between Nana and work. And then knowing all of you are talking about me.
I promise, that's not what happened. You're just really tired and overwhelmed. So why don't we just slow things down a little? You know, meetings always make me feel better, even on my worst days. Why don't we go inside, clean up a little, enjoy the program together? Then afterwards, we can all talk. I promise, it'll be okay.
We've been watching the first part of a new symposium on the Saturday afternoon of the 2022 Pursue Peace Convention. This has the theme, Seek Peace and Pursue It by Not Quickly Taking Offence. John Ekron, a helper to the Coordinators Committee, is the speaker who you saw at the start of the video. And it's the continuing saga, it seems, of Hayley, whose jewelry video has unleashed a firestorm in her congregation. All she did was make a video about jewelry. She said one or two things that ruffled the feathers of her friend Emily. Emily gossiped about her and distorted what was said by Celia, and it has resulted in an Anchorman-style showdown in the Kingdom Hall car park in which harsh words were exchanged. And apparently the solution to all of this is to go to the meeting.
You know, meetings always make me feel better, even on my worst days.
Yes, just go to the meeting. It will all be okay. So long as we get inside that Kingdom Hall, we'll just bathe for a while in the Holy Spirit. Let that Holy Spirit move us. And then once we've cleaned up a bit, we can all sit down and thrash this out together. And this, again, I have to credit the writers. I'm usually complaining about how these dramatizations are not remotely realistic. This is realistic. This is the attitude that Jehovah's Witnesses have. That the Kingdom Hall is just some magical place, and if you can get there, you will find some kind of peace. It will give you some kind of solution to your problems. And I can remember following this thinking to the extent where immediately after my mother dying, when my family was grieving her loss, the attitude was, but we still need to get to the next Kingdom Hall meeting. We'd just gone through this traumatic event, And I think it was my dad who said, we need to go to the next meeting. And we felt it was like our duty to kind of set an example. We were the grieving family in the congregation, and yet there we were at the very next meeting, because there can never really be an excuse for missing the meetings if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. They are the be-all and end-all. If you miss the meetings, you're not being faithful. You're forsaking the gathering of Christians together, as they're so often fond of quoting from Hebrews. So this is very much the mentality that Jehovah's Witnesses are expected to have no matter what situation you're going through, even to the point of having a massive confrontation and fight in the Kingdom Hall car park. You should always, always get yourself to the Kingdom Hall meetings.
I am so sorry. It's my fault. Please forgive me. No matter how we phrase it, it can be difficult to apologize. Why is that so challenging? There are many reasons. We may fear confrontation, blame, or rejection. Perhaps we feel embarrassed and we're too proud to apologize. We may reason, apologizing will not undo the blunder I've already made. And it may even be that we are angry. This is such a matter of concern that in July 2000, the California State Legislature in the United States passed a bill designed to relieve people of liability if they express sympathy to an individual who was injured in an accident in which they themselves were involved. It was noted that people often hesitate to extend an apology out of concern that it could be construed in court as an admission of guilt.
Ooh, this is interesting. So we've just been watching Ralph Walls, a helper to the Personnel Committee. He's taking us through the symposium talk, Seek Peace and Pursue It by Apologizing. And Ralph Walls is observing that it can be difficult to say sorry, that people can feel too proud to apologize, that people can feel as though if they apologize, it's a concession of guilt and therefore places them in a position of liability. Am I the only one who was watching this and thinking, well, what about the organization? What about their failure to apologize down through the years? If it's truly an imperfect organization, if they're truly capable of making mistakes, shouldn't they be able to point to examples of where they've made mistakes and where they've apologized? Because if they can't point to such examples, then every word of what Ralph Walls has just said is utter hypocrisy. You have the faithful slave, through its spiritual food, telling everyone else that they should be open to apologizing while not apologizing themselves. And to just drum this point home, just in case you're watching as a Jehovah's Witness, there is the 2017 February Watchtower study article, which made the following statement on page 26. The governing body is neither inspired nor infallible. Therefore, it can err in doctrinal matters or in organizational direction. So the governing body is not infallible, meaning that it is fallible, it is capable of making mistakes, and it can err in doctrinal matters or in organizational direction. Again, where are the examples? If it's an organization or if it's a governing body that can make mistakes, where are the mistakes? And show us the example of you apologizing after making the mistake, if you're then going to turn round to your rank and file and tell them that they should be apologizing. And I feel like I'm maybe one step ahead of one or two watching this who might be thinking, yes, but they did apologize for 1975. That's sort of the myth that gets circulated sometimes, particularly regarding that false prediction that Jehovah's Witnesses made that Armageddon was going to come in the year 1975. Let's look up the so-called apology that was printed 5 years later in 1980. And first of all, you can decide for yourself whether it's really a convincing apology. And then we're going to look at some more recent material on the subject. So in the 1980 Watchtower, March 15th, page 17, it says, with the appearance of the book Life Everlasting in Freedom of the Sons of God, and its comments as to how appropriate it would be for the millennial reign of Christ to parallel the seventh millennium of man's existence, considerable expectation was aroused regarding the year 1975. There were statements made then and thereafter stressing that this was only a possibility. Unfortunately, however, along with such cautionary information, there were other statements published that implied that such realization of hopes by that year was more of a probability than a mere possibility. It is to be regretted that these latter statements apparently overshadowed the cautionary ones and contributed to a build-up of the expectation already initiated. So that was the apology. And interestingly, if you read the book Crisis of Conscience by Raymond Franz, the celebrated apostate, the daddy of apostates really, the governing body member who defected and wrote a book about how shady the whole organization really is, but he did so in a really compelling way, I think. If you read that book, Raymond Franz explains that it was he who was tasked with writing this apology, quote unquote, but it got heavily modified. So what he would have liked to have said isn't what he ended up basically being forced to write. And I think this is a really half-baked attempt at an apology. It's basically saying, well, we said some cautionary things, don't forget. But yes, maybe we said some things that were a little bit too bold. And it's to be regretted that these bolder claims about 1975 overshadowed the cautionary statements. You can consider that an apology if you like. I'm personally not convinced at all. But even if you consider that an acceptable apology for the years of material that was printed pointing to 1975, including Kingdom Ministry articles encouraging people to sell their homes, to sell their businesses, to put themselves in vulnerable situations due to the certainty of this impending Armageddon. And all of this, by the way, is summarized. If you go on JW Facts, there's an excellent article summarizing all of the statements that were made about 1975, and perhaps Tibor can give you a quick glimpse if he's feeling gracious. Even if you accept that these wishy-washy, mealy-mouthed words cover the huge transgression that was made by the organization in impacting so many lives, you then have to account for this recent dramatization that formed part of the 2017 Don't Give Up Convention and effectively reversed the apology.
You see, back then, some were looking to a certain date as signifying the end of this old system of things. A few even went so far as selling their homes and quitting their jobs. I admit, I was ready to see this old system go away too. But something just didn't seem right. Both at meetings and in my personal study, I was reminded of what Jesus said. Nobody knows the day or hour. I was dedicated to Jehovah, not a date. After that year came and went, most of those who had wrong expectations made the needed adjustments, and they stayed. We didn't run away, and we didn't give up. We trusted in Jehovah.
Clever, isn't it? The blame gets switched onto the followers for believing the organization. It wasn't really something that the organization needed to apologize for. It was a few Jehovah's Witnesses who were racing ahead of the organization, who were investing in a certain date. If they'd only done their personal study, if they'd only listened at the meetings, they would have taken on board Christ's cautionary words about nobody knowing the day and the hour. They just needed to be a bit more spiritual, and then there would never have been a problem. So again, the entire apology, which again was just saying it is to be regretted, the entire apology just gets reversed by the current propaganda, the current whitewashing of Jehovah's Witness history that kind of buries all of this under the rug. And 1975, let's remember, is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to all of the abuse, all of the harm, all of the cruelty that this organization is responsible for over the decades. We're talking shunning. We're talking Jehovah's Witnesses dying by refusing blood. We're talking children being dissuaded from higher education. We're talking the industrial scale cover-up of child abuse. And while we're on the subject of child abuse, that's one thing that survivors of abuse are unanimous on, that the very least they would want from the organization that has played a part in their abuse is the simple word, sorry. That's the bare minimum that they need to start being able to process what happened and seek some kind of recovery from the trauma that has been inflicted on them due to, again, the way abuse gets covered up by the organization. This is an organization where apologies are conspicuous by their absence and have been throughout the organization's entire existence, and yet they have the gall to point to their followers and say, by the way, let's remember that saying sorry, hard though it may be, is the Christian thing to do.
In the following dramatization, we will see an older sister applying the inspired words of Titus chapter 2, verses 3 through 5, in order to advise younger sisters to be sound in mind. We will also observe how one of the younger sisters avoids further problems and pursues peace by humbly apologizing.
I don't know how this happened. But Hayley, I'm sorry. It hurts me to see you so upset.
I can't believe you two.
First, what you heard was not what I said.
Well, I thought that's how you felt. And even if I got that part wrong, all this drama...
Now stop. Come on, girls. Hayley, come closer. Love is patient and kind. It's not jealous. It doesn't become provoked even when things become difficult. So what are we going to do?
I just thought that... No. I'm sorry, Haley. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have judged you so harshly. I shouldn't have judged you at all. And I'm sorry for dragging you into this by twisting what you said.
It's okay. Things happen. I've been on both ends.
I should never have spoken that way to you, Celia. I mean, to either of you. Got to get home to Nan.
I'll call you tomorrow.
Bye.
So it seems with Celia's help, Haley and Emily are well on the way to patching things up, and everything's going to work out just swell now that they've all sat down together in the back room at the Kingdom Hall, where normally all manner of nasty things happen, especially if you have sex with a consenting adult to whom you're not married. That's where the judicial committees will happen. But this time it's not a judicial committee, it's 3 Jehovah's Witness women, or as they would say, sisters, getting together to thrash out their differences. I don't have too much to say here. It's all obviously a dramatization, and I've hopefully made clear my point about the hypocrisy of the organization banging on about apologizing and the merits of saying sorry given its track record. I do just think it's worth noting that what Celia is doing here in acting as a mediator, in acting as someone who is reconciling two members of the congregation, Haley and Emily, what she's doing could not be done if there were a man involved in the argument. So if there'd been any kind of argument in the car park involving men, it would not be her business to do this. It's only when it's all females involved that elders' wives or older, mature women in the congregation have some license to involve themselves in matters and bring their experience and maturity to bear to stop this from escalating into something that the elders would get involved in. So Celia's actions, laudable though they are, would be seriously frowned on if she tried playing this role of mediator in a situation involving men.
It takes courage, humility, and determination to apologize. It's interesting to note what's stated at Philippians chapter 2 and verse 3. Do nothing out of contentiousness or out of egotism, but with humility consider others superior to you. That means our determined effort is not to win an argument, which could be contentious, nor do we want to start a discussion with the primary thought being that we are in the right. That could mean that we are self-concerned or egotistical. Rather, in harmony with the principle of that scripture, we want to act with humility. Our aim should be to pursue peace. Even if we think the other person is being unreasonable, we apologize. Why is it so important to do so? Because that is what makes our worship to Jehovah acceptable. If we find ourselves in a situation when we have offended a fellow worshiper, We want to apply Jesus' counsel. We want to take the initiative to approach our brother or sister. We may need to acknowledge their hurt feelings. We may also need to ask, what can I do to make amends? Often, a sincere apology is all that is needed. When two humans are at odds, there may be a measure of blame on both sides, since both are imperfect and prone to err. This usually calls for mutual concessions. Even if only the one apologizing is right. The issue is not so much who is right and who is wrong, but who will take the initiative to make peace. When the Apostle Paul heard that the Christians in Corinth were taking fellow servants of God to secular courts over personal differences, he said, "Why do you not rather let yourself be wronged? Why do you not rather let yourself be defrauded?" The principle is clear. Peace among fellow believers is more important than proving who is right and who is wrong. Keeping this in mind makes it easier to apologize for a wrong that someone thinks we've committed against him or her. A heartfelt apology can open the way to a constructive conversation. It can minimize problems and restore peace.
There's nothing all that controversial in what Ralph Walls has just been saying there, is there? It's just the hypocrisy that I cannot stand. As I've already argued, we're talking about an organisation with a track record of never apologising when it makes serious mistakes, not just mistakes, but situations in which people end up dying, such as with the blood issue, or situations where abuse gets covered up, or children are abused because abuse is covered up. There's hypocrisy there. And there's also, quite frankly, hypocrisy in what we've heard, not just in the same convention, but the same day of the same convention. Let's remember the experience we heard earlier on the Saturday morning session in the baptism talk, when Gloria Hurd, wife of governing body member Samuel Hurd, got up and said the following.
One time, we moved in with a sister on Tuesday morning, and something I said upset her very much. She got very angry. Well, I decided not to pursue the issue because I had to live with her for a week. And I just decided to let her see by my conduct that I could never have meant what she thought. So as the week went by, the days went by, the tension lessened, and by Monday, when we left, we were the best of friends, and she gave me a big hug, and nothing more was said about the subject.
Well, sounds like you handled that beautifully, Sister Hurd.
Yes, you handled that beautifully, Sister Hurd. Only you didn't apologise, which, let's remember, is the advice that Ralph Walls has just given.
Even if we think the other person is being unreasonable, we apologize. Even if only the one apologizing is right. The issue is not so much who is right and who is wrong, but who will take the initiative to make peace.
So who do we listen to? Do we listen to Gloria Hurd and William Turner when they say it's a beautiful way to deal with things if you don't apologize after offending someone? Not just offending someone, but offending your host, in whose house you are staying. It's apparently beautiful to not apologize under those circumstances. Do we listen to Gloria Hurd and William Turner, or do we listen to Ralph Walls when he says, regardless of whose fault it is, just make sure you apologize, because that way there will be peace among Jehovah's followers? Who do we listen to? It's mixed messages. And as I've pointed out already, mixed messages and contradictory statements are exactly what you would expect from a man-made organization where you have multiple people assigned to write material for a convention, all with their own ideas and all with their own opinions. When you have that situation, something is going to get missed. I mean, you would expect there to be someone who's in charge of continuity, someone whose job it is to go through all of the talks and all of the experiences and all of the videos and make sure everything squares up. But because it's all man-made, because there is no divine direction over all of this, of course you're going to get contradictory and mixed messages.
In the following dramatization with Celia and Haley, notice why Haley finally decides to forgive freely.
Been thinking of you. Great broadcast. How did you like the new original song? Give us a call.
And so it's one of those truths transform your lives.
Maybe one day.
Yeah, definitely. I wish you could give it a rest.
Sorry?
Oh, nothing. I'm sorry. It's just Emily for the millionth time.
What's the problem, love?
There's no problem. It's just...
Difficult to let her back in. Not that simple.
Not that simple.
You want to forgive.
But not get burned again.
Keep in mind, a chance to forgive is a chance to imitate Jehovah. We wouldn't want to miss that opportunity.
I never thought about it like that.
Think back to a time when you wanted forgiveness. When it meant everything. How did it feel?
Just like Anna does as well. She really
You feel awful.
cares about you.
That you've let everyone down.
You're very precious.
And they forgive you. And suddenly everything's okay. Emily. Sorry I haven't been back to you. Have plans for tomorrow?
What good reasoning on the part of Celia. Did you notice the expression that really touched Haley's heart? A chance to forgive is a chance to imitate Jehovah. We wouldn't want to miss that opportunity. So when we've been wronged, we don't want to miss the opportunity to imitate Jehovah by forgiving freely.
We're watching governing body helper Leonard Myers. He's taking us through the symposium item, Seek Peace and Pursue It by Forgiving Freely. And right there in those two words, forgiving freely, I have a massive problem. I've spoken about it now so many times on the channel. I'm bored of repeating myself on this subject. If you want to forgive someone, that's totally fine. That's your call. Human relationships are complicated. We all get ourselves into all sorts of predicaments. with our fellow human beings. There are times when we make mistakes. There are times when we need to say sorry. And there are times when people fail us in some way and we feel we can bring ourselves to forgive them. But that should be your call. That should be your decision. But this is an organization that says it's not quite your decision. If a fellow believer wrongs you in some way, even if they do something unthinkable to you, even if it's abuse of you as a child, you need to forgive them. You need to treat them as though that person is your brother or sister. You need to feel comfortable sharing a room with them twice a week when you go to the meetings, sitting in the row behind or in front of them, maybe working with them in the preaching work. You've got to embrace them back into your life. No matter what, you don't get a say. And in my opinion, that's not forgiving freely, that's enforced forgiveness.
In the following dramatization, notice how the wise use of the tongue helps to heal.
What you did with your niece, especially this set.
Oh, thanks. You've all given me so many great ideas.
Yeah, but you make them.
Yeah.
Okay, girls. Exactly.
Oh, this is my song.
Mine too.
You have a treasured place in Jehovah's house. He will help you out.
And you have a road. Stop.
I'll tell you who else thinks it's her song, but you better get your plugs handy.
Veronica. Oh my goodness, she's in love with her own voice. Ever sit near her at the hall, like she's the only one that can sing. And
My first thought, oh no, here we go again. I've seen this movie before.
You don't think she's showing off?
Is this just about Haley?
Seems it's all about Haley.
Is there just a little bit of envy in there?
I've lived it.
If it's a case of her being more careful, how she comes across, that's another matter.
What did she suggest?
I should tell her that she needs to stop.
Can you believe that? Especially as a pioneer. What kind of example is she?
How quickly it snowballs out of control.
Not what I'm saying at all. You are such... You that lonely that you've got nothing better to do. Haley? How difficult it can be to unravel.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have judged you so harshly. I shouldn't have judged you at all.
A chance to forgive is a chance to imitate Jehovah. Think back to a time when you wanted forgiveness.
Has anyone ever tried talking to her about her singing?
You know what I love about Veronica? She's probably the most hospitable person I know. Always open house at her place. And can she cook? Have you tried her curry?
Yeah, I've tried it. It's so good. Yeah. I really look forward to that. Yeah. I love that.
You'll be pleased to know that's the end of the Haley's Jewelry video saga. Oh, thank goodness. It was getting really unbearable, that Jehovah's Witness soap opera over someone making a video promoting jewellery. Anyway, they're all happy now. They're all mates again, going to the coffee shop, singing original Jehovah's Witness songs together in the car.
You have a treasured place in Jehovah's house. He will help you out.
That's apparently what Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to do with the original songs that you see at the end of each JW Broadcasting episode. You know, those really cringy songs. Apparently Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to play them in the car. Not just play them in the car, but as we saw there, all sing along together. What a hellish world the Jehovah's Witness religion has become. It's, again, getting more and more unrecognizable. This is the sort of stuff in the past that we would have really frowned on, singing modern, contemporary style, upbeat music and using the divine name in that music. It would have been considered tantamount to blasphemy in my day. But nowadays, that's the normal thing, I suppose. This is, again, the way things are supposed to be for Jehovah's Witnesses, and I can only extend my sympathies. If you're in one of these cars and you know the real truth of the organization, perhaps you're having to carry on a pretense. You're one of those many, many people who effectively has to live a lie in order to keep friends and family happy. And then the person driving the car puts on one of these original songs and everyone bursts into song. I shouldn't be laughing. It would be a really difficult situation to be in, wouldn't it? To be in the car and to have to sing, or if you don't sing, you'll be immediately identifying yourself as someone who takes spiritual food for granted. But my real problem with this video, I don't mind people singing and having fun, quite frankly. It's something nice to see. And evidently, not all of that laughter and joviality was acting. I think they were really getting into the spirit of it, weren't they? It's not a bad thing for people to enjoy themselves. What I do have a problem with is the portrayal of women as gossipers. Because in this series, we've seen multiple examples of gossiping. We've seen Emily gossiping. We've now seen a new character, Veronica, start gossiping. The only instance of gossiping by a male in the entire series of dramatizations, forming this whole saga of Hayley's jewelry video, is the instance where Jake, or Robin, my old MTS buddy, he does a bit of gossiping in the Kingdom Hall. That's the only time we see a male gossiping in this saga. Nearly all of the gossiping, nearly all of the drama and jumping up and down over, frankly, trivialities in this series is done by women. And in my view, it's misogynistic. It's clearly being written by predominantly men who have this stereotype in their minds of women overreacting and backbiting and gossiping and being devious. And this sexist stereotype has clearly informed the dramatization that we've been seeing.
So when we talk about the uniting bond of peace, we mean that peace is the ligament. It's the tissue that holds God's people together. That was true in the first century, and is true today. Like the early Christians, we come from different backgrounds. We speak different languages. Yet Jehovah has shown us how to remain united and at peace. Now, let's explain what we mean by being united. To be united doesn't mean that we all have to like the same things or we all have to think the same on every subject. There's room for a variety of tastes and opinions. There's variety on this convention program. We don't all wear the same style of suit or have the same color of tie. What about you? What's your favorite color? Your favorite food? Your favorite pet? In Jehovah's organization, there are dog lovers and cat lovers, and not everyone likes the same breed of dog or cat. Have you ever visited someone who has a pet that he thinks is just adorable? You take one look at the animal and you wonder how anyone could love a face like that. Yet he does. People are different, and their pets are grateful for that. The variety we find among God's people today will continue on into the new world. Jehovah loves variety. How many colors are there? How many species of plants, birds, and animals? Among God's creation, we find the simple and the complex, the plain and the fancy, the sweet and the sour, the rough and the smooth. There's great variety among people. Even in the new world, perfect humans won't have the same personality, talents, and abilities. You've always wanted to play the violin? Don't think when you're perfect you'll just be able to pick up a violin and play. And there's no guarantee you'll be able to play in an orchestra.
Thank you, David, for another brilliant piece of stand-up comedy. We really are spoiled, aren't we, when we think of all of the moments of levity in a classic David Splain talk. And in this particular talk, which has the theme, Safeguard Our United Bond of Peace, I guess the overall joke is David Splain arguing for organizational diversity. Really? Jehovah's Witnesses are a diverse organization. They're allowed to have whatever pets they like. They're allowed to wear different suits and ties. And they're allowed to like different food. What a privilege. Just think how much latitude that gives you. Jehovah's Witnesses watching. You should be grateful to David Splain and the governing body for allowing you so much freedom. You get to decide what food you like and what pets you have. You get to decide whether you have a cat or a dog. You get to decide what colour of tie you wear. Those are all slam dunk examples, apparently, of how much diversity there is in this organisation. Okay, well, I'm personally not convinced. I think if you were arguing that Jehovah's Witnesses are a diverse organisation, you would be able to point to the community of gay Jehovah's Witnesses. You would be able to point to the community of lesbian or bisexual or transgender or queer Jehovah's Witnesses. You would be able to point to Jehovah's Witnesses who are concerned with equal rights and social justice and who are mobilizing in that direction. You would also be able to point to a community within Jehovah's Witnesses that is actively doing something about climate change. But we all know you're not going to find any of that, because in truth, there is no diversity in Jehovah's Witnesses. There is racial diversity. There is a diversity of backgrounds. It's just that regardless of your background, no matter what religion or culture you came from, once you join Jehovah's Witnesses, you have to become assimilated into them, and you have to become a mouthpiece for all of their ideas. There is no room for dissent. And I thought David Splain's wording here in particular was very interesting.
To be united doesn't mean that we all have to like the same things or we all have to think the same on every subject. There's room for a variety of tastes and opinions.
There's room for a variety of tastes and opinions, just not quite on every subject. Did you catch that wording? If it were truly a diverse organization, David Splain should be able to say, to be united doesn't mean that we all have to like the same things or we all have to think the same. He should be able to say that, shouldn't he? But this, let's remember, is a script that's been written. He is reading this on an auto cue, more than likely. Or if he isn't reading it on an auto cue, he's reading it off notes that have been prepared for him. And these notes have added on to the end of that sentence on every subject, because there are certain subjects where you cannot have your own opinion. And I think all Jehovah's Witnesses understand this. You cannot have your own opinion on homosexuality and call yourself a Jehovah's Witness if that opinion differs in any way from Jehovah's Witness ideology. Homophobic Jehovah's Witness ideology, to be clear. So quite sneaky, quite slimy wording there, if you don't mind me saying, David Splain. You've very cleverly used words to give this mirage of Jehovah's Witnesses being this welcoming, diverse group where you get to have your own pet and you get to choose your own suit and tie. But what does any of that really matter if Jehovah's Witnesses is also a group where you're not allowed to be gay?
Now, one way to maintain unity is to respect the conscience of others. This is very important because very often when unity is disturbed, it's because we don't respect the ability of other brothers and sisters to decide things for themselves. Now, what do we mean by the conscience? Let's be simple. It's the faculty that helps us determine right from wrong.
Sorry, David, could you repeat that?
I'm going to repeat that. The conscience is the faculty to determine right from wrong. Now, let's consider how our upbringing and our culture can help shape our personal view of right and wrong. But let's talk about our personal history. Our personal history can also affect our view of right and wrong. Some grew up in a household where alcohol was a problem. Home was not a happy place, and as adults, they stay as far away from alcohol as they can, and they take a dim view of anyone who uses it, even in moderation. To them, it's just plain wrong to drink. Others have only good memories of their childhood home. At supper time, there was always wine on the table, but nobody ever abused it. A person who left behind an immoral lifestyle might be extremely sensitive about choices of clothing. He may be troubled by a clothing style that other brothers and sisters find totally acceptable. If they're not careful, those who tend to be strict with themselves could impose their conscience on others.
Well, isn't that exactly what Tony Morris has been doing over the years? Imposing his conscience on others, including in such areas as what styles of dress and grooming are acceptable. This is David Splain, governing body member, giving the talk, Safeguard Our Uniting Bond of Peace. And in this part, he is talking about the conscience. And this is a fairly nuanced matter for Jehovah's Witnesses. Basically, you have all of the rules that Jehovah's Witnesses have to follow. Areas in which you can be punished if you get things wrong. So, for example, smoking, disfellowshipped, having sex with a consenting adult to whom you're not married, disfellowshipped, being a professional boxer, disfellowshipped, willingly and unrepentantly accepting blood, disassociated. You have all of these rules, and then you have grey areas where Jehovah's Witnesses get to decide on things based on their conscience. And this is what David Splain is referring to here. He's just doing so, in my opinion, in a way that ignores the elephant in the room, namely that this is an incredibly judgmental organization that seeks to micromanage people's lives, that tells people that if they make the wrong decisions in certain areas, some of which you wouldn't even think would be a big deal, you could potentially die at Armageddon, or you are worthy of being disfellowshipped in the here and now and estranged from your family. Of course, in that kind of culture, people are going to start imposing their consciences on others. That's the problem he's addressing, but unfortunately he's trying to close the barn door after the horse has bolted. This is exactly what the organization should expect. A judgmental organization will breed judgmental people.
Now let's consider a familiar scenario. 4 publishers are working rural territory in a car group. Now each home is separated from the next by many miles or kilometers. At the first call, the driver and her companion get out and the other sisters stay in the car. They have no choice. There's no place to go. Now the householder has many questions, and a Bible study is started. It's noon when the 2 publishers return to the car. All smiles. You know what's coming next, don't you? One of the sisters in the back seat says, "Well, the 2 of us can't count any time this morning." What's she done? She's spoken for herself and for her companion, and unintentionally, she's imposed her own conscience on her friend. Now, if she doesn't want to count any time, that's her business. But it would be best if she kept her business to herself.
Ooh, this is interesting. So this is apparently a familiar scenario featured in the talk Safeguard Our Uniting Bond of Peace as delivered by governing body member David Splain. It would be a familiar scenario for a group of women to go out in their car, and if 2 of those women took a little bit too much time on one of their calls in rural territory, where the other 2 women in the car can't get out and preach at other homes because the homes are all too far apart, it would be familiar for those 2 women to return and one of their companions to complain about not being able to count time. And I think this little situation, this scenario that David Splain has thought up and included in his talk really tells us 2 things. First of all, it tells outsiders all about the culture of counting time. What that means is when Jehovah's Witnesses call at your home, they're not just doing it casually. It's not just a case of, oh, I think I'll do some preaching today, and maybe I'll do 5 minutes and then go do something else. The minute they start preaching to someone in any given day, the clock starts. They start timing how many hours of preaching they have done in that day. And at the end of the day, at some point, they will write down the number of hours of preaching, and all of this gets accumulated on a slip of paper so that at the end of the month, they can hand a slip of paper to an elder in their congregation and tell the congregation how many hours of preaching they have done in a month. So this whole issue of counting time can be quite a complicated thing because different Jehovah's Witnesses, as has been alluded to here, have different consciences when it comes to what constitutes counting time and what is invalid, what would be dishonest when it comes to counting time. Do you have to be continually preaching to people, or can there be long periods of time throughout the day when you're not preaching to anyone for whatever reason, and keep counting your time? Now, I was the sort of pioneer who would have been counting my time, because I would have thought, well, it's beyond my control. If they come back quickly, I'm prepped and I'm ready to carry on preaching, so I shouldn't really have to take time off my day just because they're having a productive call. But I'm sure there would have been other Jehovah's Witnesses who, like the sister described, would have thought, well, I can't count any of this time because I'm not preaching to anyone. And notice how David Splain doesn't give a definitive answer here. So he could just clear it all up for everyone, but he'd rather leave us all dangling. So first of all, we're learning that Jehovah's Witnesses think it's the Christian thing to do to start a stopwatch when they start preaching to their fellow man. When they're delivering Christ's message of good news, apparently they need to time themselves. Apparently that's what the Bible writers had in mind. That's what Jesus had in mind when he said, go therefore and preach this good news of the kingdom. By the way, don't forget to keep a record of how many hours you do, and don't forget to give that number of hours every month to an elder in your congregation. That's what Jesus had in mind, apparently. We're not just learning about this culture of counting time. Thank you, David, by the way. We're also learning, again, that this is a misogynist organization. Because why did it have to be sisters? Why did it have to be women who were bickering in this way? And bear in mind, this is an organization that usually, when they're writing their material, when they're writing their scenarios in letters to elders, they will typically refer to men. They will say he or him when referring to a Jehovah's Witness in a hypothetical scenario. They do it all the time. It's actually quite frustrating. They could simply say they or them so that it's ambiguous, so that it could apply to anyone. But they always say he or him when they're referring to an unknown person in their publications. But in this particular scenario, for some reason, David Splain insists on them being female.
So here's the scenario. Two different sisters are married to men who are not in the truth. Now, in both cases, the husband's mother has died. The funeral will be in a church. One sister decides to go. The other decides against it. The sister who decides to attend has considered that in that church, there will just be a talk by a clergyman. There'll be no congregation singing, congregation prayers, or religious gestures. She was never very religious anyway, so none of that would mean anything to her. And her husband and his family will be happy if she just sits quietly until it's over. Now, the second sister has a different set of circumstances. The service in that church involves participation by the congregation. She used to be an active member of that church, and she's afraid she'll do something she'll regret. Her husband's family get very emotional at funerals, and they're likely to make a scene if she doesn't participate. So, she respectfully tells her husband that her attendance could cause him embarrassment and declines to attend. You can see that each situation is different. Now, we're going to discuss 4 questions that we might ask ourselves when we're called upon to make any difficult decision. And I will repeat the question, because if you're taking notes, you may want to write at least the question down. These are very, very good questions that we can ask ourselves before we make a difficult decision. Are you ready?
Sorry, yeah, I'm ready.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Here's number 1. What will make Jehovah happy?
Could you repeat that?
I'll repeat that. What will make Jehovah happy?
I just wrote Jehovah and put a smiley face and a question mark. Is that okay?
Now that should be our main concern, to please Jehovah. Well, how do we know what will make Jehovah happy? We identify the Bible principles that have a bearing on the situation. One way we can do that is by checking the index or the research guide. What are some scriptural principles a sister who's married to an unbeliever might consider when deciding whether to attend a funeral in a church? Can you think of some? What about 1 Peter 3, verse 1? Wives, be in subjection to your husbands. Jehovah is pleased when a Christian woman respects her husband, whether he's in the truth or not. But a wife's subjection is relative. She's dedicated to Jehovah, not to her husband. She's dedicated to Jehovah, not to her husband. So that's 1 Peter 3:1. What about Isaiah 52 and verse 11? Touch nothing unclean. Keep yourselves clean. Under the Mosaic law, if someone so much as touched something unclean, he became unclean. Many brothers and sisters would find it very hard to sit quietly while a clergyman told lies about the condition of the dead. To them, it would be touching something unclean. Others might compare that to a young person in school sitting quietly while his teacher tells lies about the origin of life.
Do you mean by teaching the science of evolution?
If someone does decide to attend a funeral in a church, he or she should be absolutely determined not to participate in any religious ritual, whether singing hymns or so much as saying amen to a prayer that a clergyman offers. Remember the goal: to please Jehovah. We'd never want to take the unloving view that if our brother is stumbled by what we do, it's too bad for him. On the other hand, if we're the type of person who is often stumbled by what others do, we need to ask Jehovah to help us gain a more balanced viewpoint.
Thank you, David Splain, for that tedious, rambling, long-winded example of just how complicated life can be in the Jehovah's Witness religion, a religion in which almost anything can be a cause of stumbling to almost anyone, and there are any number of permutations to even a decision as simple as, should I go to a funeral or not? Thanks for just putting your cards on the table, bearing in mind, again, there are outsiders watching this. Jehovah's Witnesses are marketing this convention to non-Jehovah's Witnesses using flyers to do so. What's going to be going through your mind if you're sitting through this ridiculous talk, or this ridiculous part of David Splain's talk, which is, frankly, mentally masturbating over every permutation of what happens at a non-Jehovah's Witness funeral and whether it would be acceptable to attend or not. This is how mad and nutty and micromanaging this organization is. You would think grown adults would be able to make these decisions for themselves, but apparently not. Apparently, in the year 2022, one of the things Jehovah's Witnesses most desperately need to hear in their annual convention, their Pursue Peace convention, is a rambling lecture on the do's and don'ts of attending funerals in churches.
Another situation where brothers often ask for the help of the elders involves the use of blood fractions. Should we accept them or not? The governing body has refused to impose its conscience on the brotherhood. What do we know? We know that the Bible says to abstain from blood. But as you divide it into fractions, and the fractions get tinier and tinier, at what point does blood stop being blood? Each one will have to decide that for himself. Now, some might say, well, if it's a really, really tiny fraction, it doesn't bother me to take it. But others will say, it doesn't matter to me. If it's from blood, I don't want it. And their conscience also has to be respected. Now, let's illustrate. Air is made up of nitrogen and oxygen, and together they make up 99% of air. That leaves 1%. The 1% is made up of a variety of gases: carbon dioxide, hydrogen, neon, small fractions. When it comes to small fractions, elders need to be careful, though, not to insert their personal opinion into the discussion, such as by saying, "I wouldn't take any of it." They should simply help the publisher to reason on the basic principles and let him make up his own mind. Now, sometimes medical doctors complain that their witness patients are inconsistent because we don't all have the same view of certain medical treatments. One witness patient accepts certain fractions or therapies, so the doctor figures he knows what Jehovah's Witnesses believe. But then the next patient comes along, and he rejects them all. The doctor is confused. Those doctors don't understand the role of the conscience. We shouldn't worry when medical professionals don't understand our differing viewpoints, because we should be glad that we serve a God who dignifies us with the freedom to make many of our own decisions.
Many of our own decisions, just not all of them. Just not all of our own decisions when it comes to medical treatment. In the sphere of medical treatment, it turns out that there are some decisions that Jehovah's Witnesses have already had made for them by charlatans like David Splain and his colleagues, who, despite claiming that he doesn't impose his conscience on millions of Jehovah's Witnesses, very much does.
The governing body has refused to impose its conscience on the Brotherhood. What do we know? We know that the Bible says to abstain from blood.
The Bible says to abstain from eating blood. It says nothing about the medical use of blood. How could it? When blood transfusions only started to be administered in the 19th century. You're imposing a rule while claiming not to impose any rules that not only isn't biblical and couldn't be biblical, because the writers couldn't have foreseen all of this stuff about fractions and even the possibility of using blood in medicine. You're disingenuously doing so while claiming that you refuse to impose your conscience on the Brotherhood, even though you're effectively driving Jehovah's Witnesses to death through this blood prohibition. A blood prohibition that makes no sense whatsoever when you expose it to the slightest scrutiny. I've done a video on this, and if Tibor is gracious, a thumbnail will appear. 7 questions for Jehovah's Witnesses on blood transfusions. And if you're watching this as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, especially if you're unclear on blood transfusions and perhaps you're confused about the whole thing, please watch it, because there are so many things about this particular teaching, this deadly teaching, that most Jehovah's Witnesses don't know. One example is that of the 4 fractions, one of those components are white blood cells, and you drink white blood cells every time you go to the supermarket and buy some milk. They're the white blood cells of cows that find their way into the milk, because the milk is intended not for consumption by humans, but for consumption by baby cows. And human babies, when they've just been born, receive a huge dose of their mother's white blood cells in the form of the breast milk. So, from the moment they're born, Jehovah's Witnesses, due to basic human biology, are transgressing this rule that, according to David Splain, is a hard and fast scriptural command I'm sorry, biology refutes this time and again. He talks about tiny fractions. And as an example, he describes how 1% of air isn't oxygen or nitrogen.
Air is made up of nitrogen and oxygen, and together they make up 99% of air. That leaves 1%. The 1% is made up of a variety of gases: carbon dioxide, hydrogen, neon, small fractions.
Small fractions within that 1%. Okay. Well, hemoglobin is classed by Jehovah's Witnesses as a fraction that they can either accept or refuse. They have that freedom. And to prove this, if Tibor is gracious, you will see part of the 2006 Kingdom Ministry flash up on your screen. Hemoglobin, 33% of red cells, a protein that transports oxygen throughout the body and carbon dioxide to the lungs, products being developed from human or animal hemoglobin could be used to treat patients with acute anemia or massive blood loss. And on the right-hand side, you will see an option for Jehovah's Witnesses to tick, I accept hemoglobin, or I refuse hemoglobin. Now let's keep in mind the argument David Splain was making, that 1% of air isn't really air. Well, hemoglobin makes up 15% of your blood volume. 15%. It's basically a red blood cell. A red blood cell is like a pellet of hemoglobin with a wrapper. Unlike most cells in your body, the red blood cell has even dispensed with a nucleus through the evolutionary process because it doesn't need one. Its only objective is to act as a little case to transport around this vital protein, hemoglobin, that oxygenates your body, that gives your body the oxygen it needs. Fun fact, hemoglobin is the reason your blood is red, because it's a red protein. And yet this vital substance that oxygenates your body, that makes up 15% of your blood, that is the very reason why blood is red, is classed as a fraction and something that you can accept. Meanwhile, white blood cells are classed as one of the 4 main components, and even though you literally drink them in cow's milk and babies drink them in their mother's breast milk, white blood cells are banned. It is insane. And it all comes from this decision that was made, well, obviously the decision that was made to refuse blood. But at some point in the organization's history, someone decided that the way to separate blood was in a centrifuge. In other words, the way blood responds to centrifugal forces when you spin it in a centrifuge, and the way it separates into layers, red blood cells, platelets, white blood cells, and plasma, might not be in that order, but those are the 4 components you get when you spin blood in a centrifuge. Someone in the Jehovah's Witness religion folded their arms and said, that's the way we categorize the main components of blood. There's just one small problem. That's not how scientists separate the main components of blood. They don't do it so simplistically as to say, well, how does blood behave when you spin it? As far as professionals are concerned, when we're talking about main components, it's about what do the actual components do? How vital are those components? What role do those components play? I'm telling you all this just to give you the slightest clue, especially if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, as to how incompetent and medically illiterate David Splain and his colleagues are when they're fobbing you off with this nonsense about blood fractions. And bear in mind, this is something that can kill you if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. If you tick the wrong box, if you make the wrong decision about fractions based on your conscience, you're a goner. And ultimately, for all David Splain bangs on about the conscience, for all he pretends that Jehovah's Witnesses have a say on this, isn't the entire problem that they don't have a say on this? And this is a point I keep making on the channel, and I don't mind repeating it again and again and again until someone in the medical community or someone in legislating and government actually does something about this. Jehovah's Witnesses get punished if they accept a blood transfusion. If they willingly and unrepentantly accept a blood transfusion, according to the Shepherd Book, the manual that elders read, Jehovah's Witnesses should be disassociated and shunned by their families. So quite frankly, all of this balderdash about personal conscience and personal decisions from David Splain is just white noise and sheer hypocrisy.
Remember Jeremiah 17 and verse 9. Simple expression, but so true. Jeremiah chapter 17 and verse 9. It says, "The heart is more treacherous than anything else, and is desperate. Who can know it?" The heart is treacherous. We might allow our emotions to get the better of us. For example, when a family member is disfellowshipped. If the person is living outside the home, we know that we should limit our association to necessary family business. Now, if the family was never very close, that might not be a problem. But suppose family ties are really strong. That can be a challenge. If we allow ourselves to be ruled by emotion rather than by scriptural principles, we could stretch the meaning of necessary family business to include almost any activity. The heart is treacherous.
Yes, he really went there. He had to stick the boot in for those of us who are being shunned, myself included, because we dared to disagree with the governing body, with David Splain and his mates. He had to read that scripture in Jeremiah and suggest that it would be treacherous for Jehovah's Witnesses to show some humanity, to acknowledge the existence of their disfellowshipped sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers. What a cold man he is. Actually, I'm thinking of words to describe him that I probably shouldn't say on YouTube. But this is a vile man. He didn't need to say any of this. It was already a terrible talk. It was already a talk that showcases how culty and controlling this organization is. But he just had to go there. He just had to make life that little bit more miserable for Jehovah's Witnesses who are disfellowshipped or who are otherwise being shunned by believing Jehovah's Witness family members. Make no mistake, these words, just that brief clip, just over a minute, will have an impact on relationships. There will be ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who, up to this convention, were finally having a dialogue with their believing Jehovah's Witness family members and getting on fine. And neither side necessarily trying to influence the other, both sides respecting that there was an ideological difference when it comes to religion, but just being there for each other in the most basic sense, just being a mother to a son or daughter, just being a son or daughter to a mother or father, just being human. And then after this convention, after these words are spoken by David Splain, the wall will come down again. The relationship will once again be decimated. And let's remember the context here. This is an organization that brags about pursuing peace. Peace, not just in terms of conflict and war, but peace within the family. Oh, we're all about peace within the family, apart from when someone's disfellowshipped, in which case it would be treachery to show some basic humanity and not treat someone who's stopped being a Jehovah's Witness as though they're dead.
The following video interviews are about weddings and funerals, a touchy subject in many cultures, as you will see.
In Japan, religious rituals are associated with each stage of life and with each season of the year. As Jehovah's Witnesses, we want to keep the cleanliness and unity of the congregation. In this regard, one of the most delicate areas is the decision on whether to attend a non-witness funeral or not. The first thing we must consider regarding funerals is not to be involved in religious rituals and acts of worship that are condemned by the Bible. In harmony with the principle of 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 14, we need to keep completely separate from pagan acts of worship. Next, even if we don't participate in the worship of other religions, we need to consider if our decisions could stumble someone in the congregation. When we consider the Bible principle in Luke chapter 17, verse 2, we do not want our decisions to hinder the faith of someone in the congregation. The third point to think about is our conscience. We need to seriously think about the Bible principle in Galatians chapter 6, verse 5, where it says that each must carry his own load. This Bible principle also applies when elders want to support others. Of course, those in the congregation can ask the elders for support in issues related to funerals. However, in matters of conscience, elders cannot force decisions on others. So it would be wrong to make some kind of rule regarding attending non-witness funerals. If each person can make decisions based on Bible principles, we can have a truly peaceful and free atmosphere, where each individual's differing situation is respected.
We're watching a video segment towards the end of David Splain's talk at the conclusion of the Saturday afternoon session. His theme is Safeguard Our Uniting Bond of Peace. He's already spoken extensively on the do's and don'ts of attending funerals in churches if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you have a close family member who's not a Jehovah's Witness and they want you to go to a funeral in a church. Just to clue people in on how controlling and how tedious and how micromanaging this organization is, it turns out there's no end of considerations that Jehovah's Witnesses must weigh in those particular scenarios. And now we're getting a video specifically about the situation in Japan, with all of the considerations more or less repeated about not wishing to stumble others. Actually, that issue of stumbling it's a real irritation, or it was an irritation for me, even as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Basically, it doesn't matter whether what you're doing is right or wrong or not. You could be doing something perfectly innocent, but if it stumbles someone else who thinks that there's a problem with it, then you're best not doing it. And I can give you an example. I can remember after my mother died, I really wanted to do a charity event for Macmillan Nurses, because Macmillan Nurses really helped my mother in the final stages of her illness before she died. So I thought it would be really nice, considering at the time I was quite into music, and I was even sort of playing drums and playing guitar and writing songs, and I knew lots of other young Jehovah's Witnesses who were musicians. I thought it would be really cool to do like a charity concert to raise money for Macmillan Nurses. And I floated this idea to my best friend at the time, and he kind of was quite subdued about it. And then not long after, he came back to me and he said, "Oh, there would be a problem with it though, Lloyd." And I was like, "Well, what's the problem?" "Well, I mentioned it to my mum and dad, and they said it would be," I forget exactly how he worded it now, but basically there would be a problem because it would be raising money for a worldly organization rather than for Jehovah's Witnesses. It was wrong to raise money for charity, apparently, or at least according to the conscience of my friend and his family. And just because I got that reaction from him and from his family, who I was close to, I ended up not doing the concert. Perfectly innocent thing that would have done a lot of good. But again, as a Jehovah's Witness, it's not about whether it's right or wrong. It's about whether you're going to stumble someone else who has different ideas and different opinions, and who might be, quite frankly, more fanatical about the Jehovah's Witness religion than you are.
In my culture, specifically the Namibian Oshiwambo culture, like in many African cultures, there are many spiritistic customs related to weddings that are included in wedding celebrations. Unfortunately, my family is not in the truth. So obviously for Ben and I, that was one of the main concerns. They don't understand our worship of Jehovah, and they don't understand that we apply Bible principles and not a tradition of men. We got engaged before the pandemic, but obviously now that our wedding was to be over video conferencing, it meant that we didn't have control over many things. We tried to imagine situations that could stumble our brothers or disrupt the unity in the congregation. We had to, in advance, think of Bible principles that would apply in our case. But particularly what we also found helpful was speaking to a mature elder. He gave us a principle in Proverbs 14, verse 15. He told us to be very careful when people say, "I will do this," or "I won't do this" at your wedding. Basically, it was up to us to make sure that the proceedings or things that happen at our wedding would be in order and in harmony with Bible principles. Another principle that came to mind was 1 Corinthians 10, verse 23. So obviously we knew that we had the right to do many things, but we were also very conscious of how our brothers would view our wedding. We didn't want anybody to be at our wedding and feel embarrassed or even stumble to be there. Now, looking back at our wedding, we look back with fond memories. So applying Bible principle doesn't restrict our fun. Also, it contributed to the unity among our brothers, because all of us, those present, those who were invited, we were able to enjoy the wedding. You're not worried about, oh, did that thing offend anybody? So you're able to enjoy the day without any bad memories.
Oh, how touching. We end on a positive note. with a young couple getting married over Zoom and dancing in front of their webcam because it's a socially distanced wedding. I mean, don't get me wrong. You know what I'm like about COVID. I take it very seriously, and I think it's very admirable that the Jehovah's Witness organization took it seriously and didn't insist on Jehovah's Witnesses meeting together. But speaking for myself, I mean, to each their own. If this is how the couple wants to do things, then fine. But I would have found that really weird, attending a Zoom wedding. Is that a thing? Have people been doing that outside of Jehovah's Witnesses? Doing this thing where they're dancing on their webcam while the screen full of other people are also dancing? I don't think that's how dancing works. I think maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but dancing seems to me to be something you have to do in person, otherwise it's just strange. But that aside, what we've just been seeing is yet again an example of how Jehovah's Witnesses aren't allowed to make their own decisions, even in such simple matters as how do I want my wedding to go? My wedding, my special day. I've got to think about not what I want, not what my future spouse wants. I've got to think about what the organization wants. And I've got to think about potentially stumbling other people, even though what I'm doing isn't actually wrong. That's the nature of this organization on open display. And I just want to flag this issue of culture, which I've spoken about before on this channel. Thumbnail here, if Tibor is gracious, to sushi number 302. Jehovah's Witnesses have two stances on culture. Isn't it interesting that when they're in the business of recruiting, when they're in the business of producing materials to make their organization look attractive and appealing to outsiders, they try to project themselves as welcoming of all cultures. They try to make out that you could be in any culture and still be a Jehovah's Witness. But when the rubber meets the road, when you get down to the reality of the situation, it's more like what we've just seen in this video, where a young woman from the Namibian Oshiwambo culture cannot observe her culture at her wedding. That's been stifled, that's been stamped out. So she has to get rid of her culture or put it to one side and embrace the Jehovah's Witness culture. So hopefully I don't need to say too much more on that. Hopefully that's just obvious. And if you're watching as someone who's never been one of Jehovah's Witnesses, please take note. This is an organization where, number one, you're not free to make your own decisions, even when it comes to how you do your wedding. And number two, your culture should be set to one side if it conflicts with the expectations of Jehovah's Witnesses. But that's it. That's all I have to say about the Saturday afternoon session of the 2022 Pursue Peace Convention. Gosh, this is exhausting. We're now 2 days through, though. So we've done the Friday, we've done the Saturday, and it's just now the Sunday morning and the Sunday afternoon. 2 more rebuttals and we're done. The end is in sight. So I hope you'll stay tuned for the final 2 rebuttals of this convention season. But that's all I have to share with you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.